Well, that's good to know.
I didn't know it would say that. It's the first time I've ever tried using this feature. I guess you could just hit the record icon in the top left. That must have been what I did
I
before.
actually can't remember if we're in a single party state or if consent's needed over the phone. Well, it doesn't matter to me. um,
Yeah, I
yeah,
don't
so
know over the phone. I know. I think it's only one person has to know. I think that's what
yeah,
I
because
remember.
you're on a digital device service where other parties are involved providing the service, so it's likely to be expected that some documentation of what's exchanged is going to take
Yeah.
place.
Yeah, well, nowadays anything freaking be recorded without your consent.
Well, it's interesting because as I was raised, one of the things that I really look back on and reflect well upon being taught was my mom said, "Live your life like your granddad or somebody you really respect. Position of authority is always watching what you're doing, or can see very clearly what you're doing and understands your motivations behind it."
That's a great suggestion.
Well, that's why I personally don't have a problem with Big Brother or recordings occurring everywhere, is because when it comes down to it, I have a very clear conscience and no intent to do wrong or break the law. So it's really easy for me to accept that kind of thing. And in a world with true freedom, and acceptance, it would be a non-issue if I was gay, bi, lesbian, trans, or any of those things. I'd be free to do so and have the protections like every other person in the world to engage in that. And social repercussions are going to be what social repercussions are. It's just the difference would be people actually know the truth about people. So,
Yeah.
then there'd be a whole lot of hopefully self-acceptance and understanding that the monitoring, the recording, the behavior, you know, categorizing and data collection, it's all happening anyways. The difference is it's not necessarily open to the public versus if it were a publicly agreed to thing, then it could be open to the public. So, and if government itself operated without transparency, then I think things would be a lot better than they are, because then the Epstein files wouldn't hold the key position that they do now for
Sure.
a
Yeah.
lot of other, political matters and other matters that the general population, the people, would base their opinions on and who they support.
Right. It couldn't be used as fodder to feed the public while the side who's not in power at any one time who will use that, right, to like feed the public, to enrage them and to confuse them, and ultimately making whoever is in power less effective. uh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's been some very disturbing kind of musings. I don't have any conclusions, just observations, questions, and and the direction that those questions could lead become very disturbing. Um, I lived in Minnesota as a kid, but I haven't been there since I was a kid.
Oh, no wonder,
I
because
don't,
I would notice the accent, because I used to have a Minnesota girlfriend, and they got the Swedish thing.
but it's purported now that, you know, there's essentially a Muslim town that's practicing Islam as a township
In
and
Minnesota.
in Minnesota, yeah, and instituting
I haven't heard of
policy
that.
including verging upon or entering the realm of Sharia law.
Whoa.
And it's purported that some piece of land in Texas is going to be purchased, again by Muslims. And I don't know if they're Muslims that are here, or maybe Palestinian refugees, or where these Muslims come from. And that's the thing, is there's Muslims that can live in full peace and harmony with other religions and not engage in warfare. But then there's the divisions of Muslims that do practice Islam in a way that it's a jihadi war. And to think of, and this is where I get really disturbed, to think of the construct of the Constitution where, you know, it's legal to practice one's religion, but you're practicing in your own home and you're not doing things like enforcing private policy, not public policy, but private policy socially, including punishments for things like, for example, a woman wearing a short sleeve shirt or her hair, you know, being exposed. So, you know, it's really hard to distinguish, especially not being familiar with the culture intimately enough to, at surface level or face value, be able to determine one from the other. You know, I'm not, as an American citizen, particularly exposed to that kind of thing, or never considered it a risk to me. So if I passed a Muslim in the street, I really haven't felt ever worried or unsafe. You know, it's interesting. But if we look at what's, you know, a Muslim moving to New York and then running for mayor there, and then also, ironically, supporting socialist values and socialist policies and implementing them in New York, which is in conflict with his own faith, and you know, supporting gay rights, trans rights, you know, things like that. And I saw it mentioned that, well, if you really wanted to subvert, you know, and can come in and damage the United States, the best way to do it is set up systems of failure intentionally that are in disagreement with your values. And then once everything's failed, bring your values into place and say, by Islam, we can bring enforcement and order and structure back to this society.
Oh yeah, I definitely think that's exactly what's happening.
So
At
there's
least
there's
with
that
you're
angle of
talking
it.
about what's his name, Mahmoudi or something, or
Yeah, Mamdani, or
Mamdani.
however you say
That's
it,
it, Mamdani.
Mamdani. Well,
Yeah,
so that's
Khalil.
happening, and then I think in another town, I can't remember what state it is. There's another Muslim running for office, and I don't care, to be honest, except for, you know, if a person comes to America, and this is the, you know, interesting part of it. Assimilation is part of the process where we say, okay, these are our laws, and this is our structure of governance, and not only do you need to agree to submit to that as becoming a citizen, but, you know, for those we allow to become citizens, we want them to embrace it and partake in it as an American. And so that's why I messaged you and I said, you know, are Americans actually Americans anymore? Because it's not just the legal immigrants, but absolutely higher risk would be the illegal immigrants. And not only that, but with the greatest freedom of speech, you know, presenting ideologies which are in direct conflict and opposition to the Constitution itself becomes a measure of subjugation and manipulation, to where when you alter those beliefs and they are in direct contradiction and people start acting out on those beliefs, it becomes treasonous.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And acts of rebellion against the Constitution itself. And so these are underlying prevailments to society that existed for a long time at the institution of the United States as a government, to protect it and its viability to continue to operate on behalf of and service of the people. And Thomas Jefferson stressed so much on an educated and aware population. And that's our first line of defense. Our first line of defense
I think the
is,
reason why all that's so prevalent now is, I mean, I can draw a connection at least in one way that we can thank the book The Art of War, because so much of that teaches that it's that the way you get around, or the ultimate methodology of war is to pretend you're not at war, is to essentially use psychology and manipulation tactics at the highest level. And even is what's the there's like a phrase that the Mossad uses. That's their, I can't remember what it is, but I think it's to control through deceit or something like that. It's but
well,
the
I mean,
actual,
if you
as a war tactic, that type of deceit of what you're actually doing, what your real motives are. I mean, that's the most effective, right? And we see it everywhere. And I mean, almost all these Congress people who are from another country, like Ilhan Omar, and they tend to act in full, uh, you know, opposition to Christianity. They're totally against it, and it's weird because
well,
the left
so
totally embraces that. You know,
so the interesting thing part, when you consider that, is that if people are migrating here from, and this is a country that Islam hates, right?
right.
So if they're migrating here, and a lot of them are considered refugees and they're being accepted by the liberal left, essentially, as quote humanitarians, are they being Americans in doing that? Or or is there a fuzzy gray area in there that nobody wants to talk about or nobody is talking about? And then on top of that, you know, with Israel bombing and invading Gaza, and in effect, I don't like the word uh in inciting genocide or even engaging in genocide for the land, uh or an ethnic cleansing and saying they're defending themselves. I mean, the dynamic that's being presented here is, if Islam calls for the death of anybody that believes against it, that
I
is
actually
is
think
pretty.
Islam is almost a little bit more honorable in that they're fighting a little bit more directly, it seems like. Although I do think that guys like Mamdani are the new wave, the new level, whereas Israel's been doing, or at least the Zionist Jews, they've been doing a deceitful level of manipulation on the uh, directly targeting Christianity, right? Like for a long time, and even porn, like the existence of porn. There's some guy that was like the real inventor of porn. Am I thinking it might not just be porn? It might be Pornhub. I can't remember, but it's this guy who's one of the basically the inventor of it, of pushing it out, and he declares outwardly that the goal is to subvert Christianity. He hated Christianity so much that the goal was to get into the minds of American people, and and this was just one of the tactics, if you really think about it, because clearly if they're doing one, they're probably doing many things like this at a, they're
Yeah, I
all
do.
pieces of chess on the chessboard, all doing one element, one facet of this manipulation, this corruption of society, and somehow it serves their ultimate purpose, which I think is like what you say, to then, once they've broken it down completely, then they can push their
the
whatever.
Reformations.
Yeah, their
Yeah.
Reformation in exactly.
And so, you know, ways of doing that would be by using divisive speech. And that term, it's interesting how broad scale it's become used now on both sides of the aisle. And the interesting thing is me sitting in the middle. It's kind of like I'm looking over here and I'm just
Which term?
observing. And what's that?
Which term? You said by using that
Uh,
term.
Divisive language.
Oh, divisive language. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you sit in the center of the aisle, where you're actually in the aisle, you're not on one side or the other, and you're just kind of looking at what's going back and forth and who's moving back and forth. And then you keep in mind that at the center of this aisle, and we're talking about, there's a whole bunch of us in the center of the aisle, and a lot of us may choose not to look at either side of the aisle. We're just trailing away on our own. But to remember that if this is America as a whole, that the rest of the world is outside. Okay, and so that presents an entirely different perspective on the whole situation, where it's not just the left against right in the United States or any other, as they deem them or call them, free countries, but it's more so that the left and the right exist in a world where there are many other worldviews, and many of them align in being against the worldviews of America itself, the Constitution itself, the freedoms inherent to it, the practice of free religion and free speech, the right to bear arms, the right to free press, and all the other privileges that we really have. And the thing about it is, Americans fought and die and fight and die for these rights. So it goes back to force doctrine and our ability to enforce it.
Well, we went through a period of time too where, especially because of the technology, the thing I was mentioning before about um, the different types of technology companies I was working with in the late 90s, where there was actually an almost opposite element of what's happening today with AI, where people were coming together and actually it had a unification quality, it had a unity inherent in it because of the fact that it was merit based, it was skill based, and so really just because you really needed to have one of these companies, it required to get the best people you could get. Well, and that's always been the case, right? People make the company, but at that time, people, the whoever's interested in creating this division, uh, I think saw that happening, saw this this oneness, this unity taking place that superseded their propaganda. It was almost like an energy that needed to be destroyed, an energetic direction. And I think it's since then been taught. And actually, what's interesting for me is I watched it literally happen in real time because I could see, like, I would have I had this Iranian friend who I worked with, and I had a couple of different Iranian friends. And then I was standing outside with him right after the 9/11 happened, and it's
Yeah.
maybe a month later or something, and that right afterwards there was this massive polarizing shift among the psyche of the collective. So whereas I could stand outside with him because I worked with him, right? We're working together all the time, and it really didn't matter what you looked like. I mean, and also there was a cross race thing going on. It really didn't matter what race you were or what country you were from. Just the best people got together, and so we would stand outside on the road. I had this downtown business, so right down the center drag, and I was right there in the middle. And anyway, post 9/11, not a month later, I'm standing out on the road with my friend, just like we would always do for lunch or whatever it was. And some person like drives down the road and screams some hateful something. Even remember what they said, but it was completely just like it was so shocking to me. I could literally feel the um, just this shift in not only kind of like collective intelligence, but also this radicalization of uh, of that moment of that event, using that. And to me, that was how I was immediately, actually, when I saw the whole thing. I saw that happening, and I could see that this is a technique. This is something going on, because I was part of it. I was part of this unification thing happening, and also recognizing the beauty. That was the thing that we would always talk about. Is like, man, this it just doesn't. Oh, you've got the idea, and it was like um, a snowball effect of energy, of goodness, and we would cultivate it together. And they might have something from their perspective and even their religion, right? It was cross religious. So that's kind of why I've always thought, like, all religions, in a way, if you find God through any religion, or any self discovery or whatever, in a way they all align. There is some kind of
Well,
similarity between all these things, and that was exactly what
what's
needed to be destroyed.
yeah, and that's really sad, actually. um,
Oh, it's
but
extremely sad. It was horrible to watch in real time, and to watch my friend just be screamed at, and the confusion in his face while that was happening. Like, oh shit, I'm a target now. Like, I haven't even done anything wrong.
well, so
Really
what's
contributing to the goodness of the world, right? Like,
what's interesting and also very sad is to consider that Netanyahu like immediately went to releasing videos denouncing involvement when nobody was pointing a finger. The public eye was just very extremely focused on liberal left did it. It's a clean cut case, and it's put away. And now we're going to see the left and the right really go back and forth on this, and it's a huge issue that's going to get worse from an outsider's perspective that doesn't understand kind of the peaceful conservative Christian values that are associated with, I guess, what you would call Charlie Kirk's camp. The people that really resonated with Charlie Kirk are going to, hey, if you have a problem, let's talk about it. And that was just easily recognizable, one of his core values. So I think anybody that really supports him has that kind of core value. Like, we'd really rather not engage in violence or harm anybody. We would much rather figure this out and talk about it. And if we're going to make any decisive moves or take any kind of action, we want to act knowing the facts. And like myself, coming to respect Charlie, it was an interesting experience because at first Charlie was represented to me as somebody that had absolutely contradicting values to me. And my introduction into listening to him was from the perspective of Charlie Kirk is against me if I'm going to trust the person that sent me to look. And this person that sent me to look is trying to validate the things that they're telling me by making Charlie Kirk out to be a bad person.
what was
And
if you don't mind sharing, what was the specific thing? Do you remember?
it was racism and sexism and being anti-LGBTQ.
Interesting.
Those three core values. Because
So they would have
I'm
had
not
to only
race.
get there by having a
Well,
soundbite clip that doesn't represent his full view, because pretty much all those
yeah,
weren't his
yeah.
perspective.
So this person knew that I I have friends of all color. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. If you're a good person, you're a good person. The quality of character. So it's interesting because I hold that value. I'm anti racism, which includes people being racist against white people.
Sure, of course it does.
It is what it is. Racism is racism, whether it goes this way or that way.
Well, that's the new
And
racism.
any race can be racist. So the only issue that I have is with racism. And people can change, and they can go from being a racist to learning and not being a racist. So that doesn't mean that I'm against the person. I'm just against the mentality and it's the way it's used and the misunderstanding it really belies. So there's racism, and then there's um, the anti-LGBTQ, like my kids are part of that community and identify that way. And I've had experiences in my life where I've questioned things and tried to understand that. And part of discovering yourself is asking any worldview or any way that the world is viewed. Does this align with me? But not just on a surface level. The more you to understand these ideas in depth, the more in depth you get to understand yourself as well. The deeper dive you do into an external idea, it builds up inside of you and becomes a registry of part of yourself. And so, part of that is, well, on the surface of ideas like socialism and communism, idealistically, well, that sounds great. But the deeper you go into it and saying, okay, well, how does this work, and what is it just beyond this very eloquent and graceful, beautiful phrase of people sharing things or people owning their work, basically. Like those are beautiful ideas on the surface, but let's get into what that looks like.
A lot of it
And
has to
then
do with
see,
numbers because
well,
kind of like the
well,
groupthink. Did you ever study groupthink at all? Like how there's a certain
you just
amount of people where there's a breakdown in communication, and there's a magic
the
number of
deeper.
people in a group. So, and it's somewhere around 20, like the
No,
breakdown
I'm talking
starts
about
happening.
I'm talking about just an individual and how they form their identity. And saying, the deeper you go into something and understanding what it is in reality, not just as an idea, but what it is in reality, then the reality of yourself being connected to, attached to, or associated with, or how you really feel about it, that's going to also become a reality instead of just an idea. And so at some point, you can either decide this is me or it's not. In fact, at any time, you can say this is me or it's not. And you can go back and forth because it's your identity. And
No,
that's just who
I'm
you
totally
are.
in agreement. I meant that as a relationship to the beautiful
Yeah.
things that break down inside socialism and communism. Because I also am very, uh, I've never
Well,
had a
it could
color
be
to those
by,
words. I've never had looked through it through rose-colored glasses, but I do realize that there's this inherent breakdown
I
in
mean,
size of things,
any part of an idea identity, and I really probably shouldn't have used those as a. Let's just like if somebody likes orange juice or not. The idea of liking orange juice sounds good. You try orange juice, maybe the first time you love it, and then the next time you don't, and maybe your experiences are with different kinds of orange juice, and so that's going to play a factor. And maybe you just really don't like the sour part, or maybe you just really can't do the sweet part, or maybe you love it all and you always love orange juice. But my point is, the idea of orange juice, as it's described, is one thing, and then the experience of it is something else. The more you try it, the more in depth you go with understanding orange juice, the more you're going to realize yourself. Do I like orange juice? Do I love orange juice? Do I hate? Is it okay sometimes? Do I drink it because it's good for me? Is it better if it's mixed with something? So all of these different alternatives are reflective of the identity of a person, and that the element of choice is constantly persistent. And when you go onto a social scale, then you start bringing in social influences and the attachments and connections, and seeing ourselves through the lens of the other, which is very, very common, and understanding ourselves through the lens of another or a group of people. So if you're with 10 people that love orange juice and you've never had orange juice, um, then the prevailing idea is that it's great. And so you have a bias when you first experience it. That bias is going to become a part of you and your identity as you experience it, as long as you give credence or credit and influence to those projecting that dream. And the same is true for the opposite if you're with 10 people that don't like orange juice. Now, if orange juice is a metaphor for religion or ideology or structures of government, or whether or not it's okay to use language in one way or in any other way, it's applicable where the subject of influence applies. So for me, for example, racism was an idea I heard about as a kid. I didn't experience until the middle of elementary school, like second grade. I had a friend named Antoine. We played together. And I had a few other friends, and then after a couple months, I kind of noticed, like, hey, one of the kids' name was John. I can't remember the other name of these two other kids. They wouldn't play with me when I was playing with Antoine. I didn't get it. I didn't understand. It made no sense to me. And so one day, while having lunch, I asked John, and he said, we don't play with black kids. And I looked over, down the lunch table a ways, and I saw Antoine. And for the first time, I saw a black person. And I looked back at them and I said, why not? And they said, we're not allowed to. Our parents, blah, blah, blah. And I looked back at Antoine and I'm like, is there something? I asked out loud, is there something wrong with being black? And a bunch of kids laughed, and then it's like, I'm the fool. And the reality of it was when after a few weeks, they said, hey, look, we can't keep hanging out with you if you keep hanging out with Antoine. It's like, these are my three core friends and in this grade in the school. And I'm like, well, what choice do I make? And Antoine, all the same, it's like, he's told me his side of the story is he wishes he could play with me and John and this other kid, because we'd go and we'd chase girls and that looked like a lot of fun, but he couldn't do it alone. He didn't have enough confidence. And wanted it to be a group thing and be included and stuff. So it's like these values of inclusion, like they're inherent to me, but the racism itself was foreign, and it had to be demonstrated. Where I'd heard about it as an idea for many years, I had no idea what it actually looked like. And so, I was so confused and stuff. I can't remember if it was my mom or my dad, but I talked to, it might have been both of them, and talking to them, but I think it was my mom who was really, pointing out, she said, that's racist. They're being racist. And then my mom asked me, or my dad, said, well, which one is telling you they can't hang out with you because of the other? And I said, well, it's John. And they said, well, how does that feel? And I'm like, well, it doesn't feel right. And they said, well, if it doesn't feel right to you, then maybe you should think about it. And it's like, you know what, you're right. So I didn't worry about not hanging out with John and the other kid anymore. I just hung out with Antoine. I made more
Sure.
other friends, and then and then suddenly I'm noticing, well, there's a bunch of other white kids that are playing with me and Antoine, and even other black and Mexican kids. Like, I'm starting to actually see color and notice. And I'm like, well, we all, we get this, but these two kids were self-isolated because of it. And the interesting thing was, because I hung out with them initially and didn't pick up on the cues, they thought I was racist. They thought I was hanging out with them because we, you know, connected in that way, or had the same kind, maybe it was the way I wore my clothes. I don't even know what it was, but they kind of had this assumption that, hey, like, I'm being rebellious by playing with this black boy, and they're being good kids, but by not, and maybe perceive me in that way. I don't know,
That's
but
the need to
the
self-justify, right? And it's also relevant or related to like what I mentioned earlier, the that truth is uncomfortable and that people prefer the illusion because as kids, we're all come from a more honest, truthful place, and the more kid-like we are, the less of this filtered kind of misinformation that comes from outside, and our parents often do this to us accidentally. Um,
well, yeah, we start off with biological preferences and then lean more and more towards social, psychological
right,
preferences.
and that need to fit in, or there's some kind of universality to that. We all kind of need to fit in a little bit, or else because knowledge can be seeing something other people don't see is lonely because of that need for people to stay in the illusion. They're going to then self-justify. They're going to find a reason why you're not part of the clan anymore.
Yeah, and it's
And they'll
sad
call you out.
because,
They'll point fingers. You know what I mean? And then it becomes a game of virtue signaling as you get older, and that's what we see just happening everywhere, right? Like this guy Destiny
well, yeah,
wrote a tweet about the thing today. It says this
well, it's
Charlie
it's
Kirk
interesting.
memorial is indistinguishable from a Nazi rally, and fuck anyone who wants to pretend it's not. That guy, you know who that is? Stephen Bunnell, Destiny.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you've probably seen him debate Andrew and stuff. He's
And
a he's such a kook.
I just saw a headline announcing an indictment or something of that nature regarding Destiny.
Oh yeah, it happened
Was
a couple months ago actually. Yeah, so he's got this whole thing with an underage, but he filmed a girl who was 17, and then she didn't even know about it. Her name's Pixie, and then he was with someone. So he filmed their sexual encounter, and then shared it with another girl, who then released it.
no. This article was in the last, I believe, 24 hours or just the last couple of days,
Oh, the thing
having to do
about
with
the YouTube stuff.
incitement to violence and comments made that could be in relation to violent crime that has occurred and a trail
Yeah,
of
that's
evidence.
mostly about Hassan Piker. The Destiny stuff, it's been spinning around, but actually he was banned from YouTube in 2022, I think. And so that's
2023, yeah.
yeah. So I'm not sure about that new
But
thing because
but
he's quite
he's
successful.
still operating from other I'll have to look into it more and
Yeah,
see because
he's quite
it
successful.
looked
He does that's what he has a the reason he's so successful is because he's one of the first people on the debate online debate train, and so he really developed a you know a massive following and a massive um, flow of energy just from being one of the first people on that, and
I think I got derailed a little bit because I was going to link that experience to looking into the claim of Charlie being racist
okay.
and trying to weigh that, trying to weigh that claim and being able to see through that, not just by his words, but by his behavior. Um, and so, being able to dispel that, but also the being able to relate to some of the more recent clips of Charlie that I saw where he was talking about how he had met with Netanyahu, how he had started to look closer at what was happening in Gaza and starting to look closer at the activities, the actual behavior itself of the Israeli government and Israeli army and what was happening there because he'd been a long time supporter of Israel.
Well, he
And
was on
then
the PBD podcast and he mentioned something about how you just can't look away from the realization that they're committing some form of genocide, and that was something he'd never publicly said so
it
directly.
was after, yeah, it was after that. And so
But yeah, he's had other things. I know. I saw that too.
if you look at, like Netanyahu coming out just so quickly and denouncing involvement and while nobody's looking at him, if you look at public statements where he said, hey, I'm getting threats and texts uh, about this, about Israel, coming from, he's like, I love the people and I support the people and I'm a, Christian and like,
Yeah, he said
but
that on
there's,
Megyn Kelly, I believe. Yeah,
yeah, he did. And so, but these were very recent affairs. And so if you
it
look,
was right. All this all happened just in the last month.
yeah, and so
Before.
if you really consider that and just this kid, right? This kid, and from the moment it happened, it just didn't sit right.
What didn't sit
The
right?
whole the whole the whole thing, the assassination, it didn't add up. Oh, there's kids videoing him on the roof before it happens, and this untrained 22-year-old executed this well thought out type of plan without being nervous or you know and previously came across as a fairly regular kid and then went to college and then now he's got this trans roommate and then just following kind of the evidence that Candace Owens has been bringing up as a friend that actually loved Charlie Kirk. It makes sense to me, if my best friend was shot tomorrow and they caught the person, I'd need to know why. as we're seeking justice. Because if it's just some strange kid that didn't have a personalized reason for shooting Charlie Kirk, it makes no sense.
Well,
If you look at
it
human,
does though
if you
if you plug in the
even
AI thing that I was talking about. Then it
well
actually
even
makes the most sense if you ask me. And even especially this whole kind of concept of where it connects to Israel, because the way that you're going to achieve the most disruption, like let's say that what I was proposing, that CERN actually is just the biggest AI computer in the world, and that's whoever's running that, their real goal is that they believe they're the chosen people who are, their goal is to create God. And right now, AI is the most powerful weapon in the world. So if you just take that into consideration, that whoever is in control of that, that's the ultimate ruler. That's the, and anybody else that, and if you just steel man that possibility for a second, that if that was the case, if AI was controlling things through the information super system that we live inside of right now, and if because of how interconnected the internet is and interwoven our experience of life is with it, that you could actually fabricate socially constructed events that are so complex it's impossible to unravel. It's so complex because there's so many thousands of layers, whereas our minds, because we're human, seek to find a singular source of blame. We seek to, it's almost inherent in our need to judge things so that we can move on. And so once we have that, but what the best way, if you really wanted to disrupt, create a disruption that's going to have the effect of ultimate division, the way it, and let's just steel manning this possibility that this exists, that and I'm not saying CERN is that, but I do believe maybe that is what it is. I know that this exists already anyway, though, whether it's just a building filled with computers that the military runs, or and that that there's different ones competing against each other right now, and whoever is in control of those things, their attempt is to create God and to be in control of God, and they
right.
think
Well,
that
that's kind of going again on a pretty far out there kind of tangent. And I'm not sure relativistically
well, I mean,
where it
blaming
fits.
Israel, or just because my point is that I think that
Well,
it doesn't really
I'm not.
matter who is to blame for this, and Israel is up to all sorts of nefarious things. They're bad news, you know what I mean? But
I
that
think
to step
I
outside
think
of it.
that if somebody is silencing a truth seeker for the sake of silencing truth, then we should know who that is, not just who pulled the trigger. And if it's through AI, then let that show by by the investigation. But what's interesting is the conversations that they have pulled from his phone and stuff like those themselves don't fully add up. And the Discord references and they don't fully add up
Well,
to
not
even a
when you
kid
think of
Kate.
them as a single source, right? If you think of them as a person, then of course it doesn't, right? But if you were to, so if the AI has ability to manufacture things that are like digital documents, for instance, it's completely within its power to do that exactly. This he's in a type of solitary confinement right now where there's literally no interaction with the world. He can't see any of this stuff that's transpiring outside except
But
for
he's
what his
also
lawyer shares with him. So there's no way to
he didn't have
immediately
any
respond and say, "Hey, that's not my stuff." So even if
he didn't have counsel. He didn't have
right,
counsel until
he got it provided for him because he's indigent. They judged him as an indigent, and then so
yeah,
anyway, do
but
you see what I'm saying? So even the
that just
memes
happened.
and the
But look at how he conducted himself throughout the arrest and detainment period. He's conducted himself like somebody that's been coached. Don't
I thought so
say
too, absolutely. He's been
anyway.
coached,
And
and it could even be at the level of CIA type of manipulation, where it's like, hey man, we need you to take the fall for this. You know,
right, so we
we're gonna protect you though. So all you got to do is
so
go through
then
this process, and in the end, we're gonna protect you because we're more powerful than what you're gonna see in these judges and stuff. And in the end, and that could even be a manipulation, right? Like people are so
it could
manipulatable.
be, or it could be an inside job.
And it
And
could
that,
there could even be this connect. I mean, that if you once again plug in the AI as a possibility of doing this type of warfare against us with the goal of
I
division ultimately, then
highly,
even the Israeli component could be a part of it,
I,
as if it's feeding. So you
I,
get it all to
I,
happen at the same time. You got people over here.
no, no, I highly, highly, highly doubt AI was a major contributor to the psyche of this kid. In
No,
fact,
it's not
like,
of the kid. It's you see what I'm saying? It's the thing that's what it's doing is creating a system of operation, if you would call it that, that's so complex because it's driven by so many more neurons, so many more facets of intelligence and ability, because it's able to concoct something like 1,000 press releases in a second, 1,000 memes a second, you know, and actually distribute that through the internet. And that things like that, if they were in control of, or if somebody had a goal for division and were using something like AI, of course AI is being used for that right now. Did you see the video that I sent you earlier? Did you watch that at all?
yeah, I mean, I didn't do a deep dive
Yeah. So
into
the
any of
really
them
the real cool the one that
because
I
they were
sent, the Sam
pretty,
Altman one, it's about, so Tucker Carlson's asking, he was really prepared, Tucker Carlson, for this interview, and Sam Altman wasn't. And it's only an hour. They barely get into it,
yeah,
but it
and
exactly
Sam Alton
touches on what I'm
gave a
talking
lot of,
about.
yeah, you guys gave a lot, like you're totally stuck in AI when that's like absolutely not at all what I'm talking about. This whole, I don't know how we keep ending up on that tangent, but because I'm
Well, because this is a conversation
relativistically
and I'm proposing it.
right, but I'm relativistically kind of going, and I've stayed entirely around Charlie Kirk though, and this the relevancy to things like the Muslims and the relevancy to Israel, where you have one country that or one faith that is openly genocidal, and then you have the other, which is kind of portraying the genocide by reaction. And so it's the two wrongs don't make a right type of scenario. And where one is already openly opposed to the United States and the other one is not openly opposed to the United States. However, there's a lot of indications that there's a frictional relationship that's been going on for a long period of time between the United States and Israel. And then for Charlie Kirk to have this experience um, is a topic that's very highly relevant because it goes straight back to the Epstein files and the indications that Epstein was a Mossad agent or a cross agent with the Mossad, and the supposition that there's truth to the
I mean, for me, that's a
idea.
given. I already know
Well,
that.
yeah,
I don't even. That's not even speculation.
not anymore, right? So if you really kind of start drawing these connections together, and then also on top of that, Charlie Kirk very clearly saying release the Epstein files. Now, if the blackmail against the United States goes high up into the elite, rich bankers and corporate officers and government officials, then it's really people saving their own hide. They're not releasing this. And what it indicates is a very demonic type of agreement between two countries, which is premised upon blackmail and essentially involves a whole lot of treason with both countries and a whole and it's in many ways acts of war. So in having this presupposition that this is the case, then the only way to get the Epstein files released, because of so many higher ups that are implicated, it's got to come from a low level whistleblower type of position. Whether it's related to Charlie Kirk's assassination or not, I just can't help but notice these things surrounding it. I mean, conversely, we could say that it could have been purportedly done as an inside job for the right to instigate the reaction of the Christian conservative American movement to grow and become more powerful. So, I mean, but when you look at these types of assassinations and crimes, the motive and the human behavior, I mean, some of these elements are really the most important thing, because those were the indicators about JFK that people could pick up on and observed, and they were right all along. And
Totally.
so
I
when
mean,
you
I
look,
think that's where I'm getting at. To me, I mean, if you really, I've been on this train for a very long time, and there's literally no question that that's what's happening. And even the presidents that we see, whether it's Netanyahu or Trump or anybody, especially in our country, I think we're far removed from the point where those people are the ones in control. I mean, we're far past that time. Have you ever heard of that one document that was the study that was done? I think it was 1949, but it might be 1959. And it was by this guy who was actually, uh, I can't remember who hired him, but it was a government agency. It was either the CIA or the FBI um, or Congress or something like that. But anyway, he was hired to do an investigation into corruption in government. And he came back with this report that went all the way back to like 1901 or something like that, and had to do with it incorporated the Freemasons. It incorporated a type of infiltration into government at that time that went back. And this is just as back as he went in this particular report. It was the report stated that the goal was to get into the government systems in a way that was covert. It was to not to hide it, but yet to have there was an organizational structure that actually superseded the Freemasons. They're just one component of it, and there's a direct connection to Israel before the formation of Israel and to the Jews. And anyway, these particular Jews, the Zionists, they go way back to this time. So it turns out in this report that the guy had that this is one of the things that related to like the Smedley Butler guy who wrote the book War as a Racket, and that was I think 1929 or something like that. But so this is after this stuff had already become successful, and it said in his report that this other guy did that was later hidden from people and not really prominently spoken of. He talked about how it wasn't just government; it was also education. It was literally every facet of the American system, and to gain a type of control that was a hidden hand control. And anyway, I think it relates to what you're talking about, because I think this has been happening for a long time, but that before that, before whatever point where these guys organized around this, it was more disparate. Like it was like
the
bad
the
people just more far away from each other, whereas
the
they culminated.
simplicity of the Constitution is in the elegance. The
Right.
elegance
The
is in the
goal
simplicity of it.
was to break the function of the Constitution, right? And
Well,
almost
yeah,
all the
so it's
things
all
that we
about,
got since after that, which this guy, you know, talked
yeah,
about
so
in
it's
his report,
it's
is
that,
like things like the internal revenue, so the
yeah, the
income
creation
tax
of
that was in.
extra agency through
Like all,
utilization of legislation which is unconstitutional,
Also, the
but
Rockefellers
usually,
controlling the school system, right? Like they actually literally public like, and that all comes from the Schule, right? The school system thing, where the Schule came from the Prussians, who predated the Nazis. I think they were the Second Reich or something, right? The Prussian system, they were the ones, and the reason, do you know that story? The reason they created their Schule system was because they had these the guys in their army would like piss their pants and totally be shit warriors, and they couldn't figure out how to get them trained right. And so they developed the Schule system, which was to indoctrinate the children from a very young age, and they openly referenced that when they put it in the United States, like, and that's why all our words inside the Schule systems, and we still use it, school, uh, are also bizarrely sounding. Like I always wonder why does it these words sound so German, kindergarten and stuff. And it's like, well, no, they literally, but they said, I think part of their reasoning was they said, oh no, we're going to do it the right way. We're going to, but we're going to use that same system because the system of indoctrination, because it's so successful and you have to get the kids at a young age. So all of that is all part of a grand
yeah.
plan.
Well, I mean, the thing about it is, it's part of somebody's plan, and one of the interesting things about the United States is it's a convergence of many different belief systems and ideas, and so you're not going to get anyone acting uniformly, but you're going to get many of these factions, these interests acting independently and then at times in coalition with each other to achieve agendas. But they're always kind of meant to counterbalance each other with American values being centrified in the Constitution. Uh,
Which is why
the
they needed
scales,
to make those people who are making these plans and actually enacting them out. They need to make those societies that they shared in and were part of secret. So that's why the Freemasons is like a secret society. The Skull and Bones, the different elements within those same uh, functions that actually go way back. The historic connections goes for way back into
it's
connections, even
interesting.
to the Catholic Church.
Yeah, because even like pretty much every ancient group or organization that's secretive seems to have this representation of doing both a lot of good and a lot of harm in different ways, and it's almost as though they're equally divided in what and within themselves about the right
Probably,
course of action.
I think that's why they have
No,
the different levels, right? So that even like in the Freemasons, they have the 33rd degree Mason is where you actually learn what they're really doing. But until you get rise up the ranks, you're really compartmentalized, and you really don't even understand the whole machine at all. You've been compartmentalized into this information bubble, and so but which makes you a better enactor of whatever their ultimate goal is.
yeah, because you're essentially innocent
Yeah, you're a
of
pawn,
their
and
of their agenda.
they're the real chess master moving these things around and knowing the role of that needs to be in place for certain things. So it's like you use the knight for this move, you use the pawn for this move. You only use the queen and the king for these special moves. And really, I
There
think
was
chess is a
a
good metaphor for this type of control in society, because I think there is a hidden hand.
well, and a good like real life type of example is I know a guy and he said, "Hey, I'm going to buy a new TV and a PlayStation." I was like, whoa, and he worked for me. I was like, you were just talking about, how you make enough to pay bills and you're good. And he's like, yeah, so I'm going to have a car wash, tomorrow. I was like, oh, okay, you're going to make some money or what? No, dude. He told some kids to have this car wash. He'd throw them an ice cream pizza party. And so they did. And they made like, I don't know, $2,200, $2,300. in a weekend, just washing a shit ton of cars and taking in donations because they're cute kids and shit. And and so he spent $100 on pizza and ice cream.
Totally.
And so it's
That's
interesting
the
because
Tom Sawyer move right there.
well, it is, but it really it gives, if you think about that kind of mechanism on a large scale, where you get a bunch of people to act and work hard and do a lot of good things, and then you take the proceeds from that because it was so productive and beneficial and profitable, and do something nefarious and terrible with the profits. So that's a very
That's what I was
kind of
talking
real.
about. I think that's like the evolution of art of war, getting into societal constructs and uh, this. I mean, I think that's always been there. I'm not obviously Art of War isn't the only book that created this. I think I just use it as a symbolic reference because it very clearly articulates this type of convoluted structure of psychological manipulation as a war tactic. And anyway, I think when you get into warrior, I think that's also a, a symbolic type of representation of different aspects of life, like these.
Right. So if
Who's
you
the
if you have
emperor controlling the warrior? Who's the Are you
well,
the warrior,
that's
or
the
are you
thing is
just
there
are you
isn't.
the people who the warrior is designed to protect? And
Well, that's the thing is there isn't one. There's many. So we've got bankers in the money machine, and we've got
exactly.
idealists. We've got other countries and with their religious doctrines. We've got you know terrorism groups that are terrorists that don't know why, and we've got liberal left, and so we've got a whole lot of just confusion amok, and then we've got broad scale a lot of individuals that really just want to get by, really don't want to muddy waters. They want to comfortable. Like the people in general are fairly simple, and it's the ones that have the ulterior motivations to make these kinds of changes, but not do so in a transparent way, but in a manipulative way, or not be seen doing it.
Well, that's why
Um,
the have you ever heard of the Creature from Jekyll Island? That book.
yeah,
You're familiar with it.
yeah,
So that whole concept of how they met in secret on Jekyll Island, right? The reason why you do that is because you can't have that type of information publicized. It breaks the. It's kind of like what we were talking about with entrainment. It breaks the cycle if somebody knows that they're being manipulated. It only
yeah.
works
Because
when you don't know you're being manipulated, and then
yeah,
you're
it
acting in
goes
your own best intentions. You think you're
yeah,
working for
because
yourself.
it goes back to awareness results in empowerment and then choice. So ultimately, the development of a responsibility and then a self accountability.
Yeah, yeah,
Awareness, that's kind of this process that happens. And so as long as they're unaware, they're fairly innocent, but you know, paying for the next war that their country is going to have to face. If you apply the car wash type, analogy
absolutely.
to it in a broad scale, then they're taking billions or hundreds of billions of dollars, and then they're investing that into warfare technologies, tactics, methods, and even armies, etc.
It's like
And
the left
to
right
act
now with
against.
their calling people fascist at the same time as celebrating the death of their political rivals, and
But see,
which is a
when
state of
you
fascism based on right. So it's like the and yet to inability to look at yourself and see yourself doing it.
when you look at the behaviors of the extreme left and you just kind of observe them, they're targeting or triggered. In either case, they're carrying these wounds and obviously have been given cause to hold the views that they hold. And a lot of times, going back to what one psychologist referenced, being a masculine wounding of the early childhood, or of even some patriarchal resistance because of experience of oppression, or et cetera, et cetera. There's all these things. But if you look at the behavior of these liberal leftists, a lot of times they're triggered or targeting. By targeting, it's anyone and everyone that fits the description of what they classify as an enemy. So that's targeting, and it happens broad scale, and it happens very often. Where they'll see somebody that's wearing a MAGA hat, target them and go after them. And then there's triggered. The ones that are triggered are reacting to something personal, a stimulation that's happening in the moment, and their trauma, their trigger response is to fight. And you see a lot of reactionary, oh, that person's, and it's not necessarily that they're targeting and looking for something, but they see somebody with a MAGA hat because they felt judged by their father or uncle, or some internal trauma or wounding. They're reacting to that with fight.
Well, yeah, I mean, and also
So,
they
those,
act as if they're in fear. They're going to be the one who throws the first punch, but then when they say it to somebody else, they'll say, "I was afraid for my
right.
life, and that
So
person
when
was going
you,
to kill me, or they were going to hurt me." And I live with a person
so
who
yeah,
actually
so the
does this on a
interesting,
daily basis. Like
right,
sometimes she'll say, "Well, we'll barely be talking about
so the,
anything," and she'll just be like, "I'm afraid you're going to hit me right now," and I'm like, "What the
and
heck?"
it's always emotional. There's kind of passionate
Always,
response.
yeah.
Right. Okay. So now here's the thing. Psychopaths, when they're targeting and they're hunting, as they call it, um, are not high profile because they're intelligent, and in not worrying and not having that conscience, they want to prolong what they're doing, so they act in ways to not get caught. Psychopaths, after having a violent or traumatic experience, maintain their composure. Oftentimes they don't shake, they don't show any kinds of shock or physical biological trauma response, because they're actually not impacted the same way. Whereas these emotional reactions are being triggered and targeted. So if you look at those simple and well established and well known patterns of behavior, and you look at Tyler Robinson, then you can't help but wonder at the claim that he's an extreme liberal leftist, in that he wasn't targeting openly or triggered,
Yeah,
and that
well,
he
some
remained
new thing came
calm.
out just today that his friends say that he's was super apolitical and that he never posted anything political, and that
And
so
see
they're
that,
wondering why that that almost leads to something else. But I do think it's very possible that he's a victim of stochastic terrorism, right? You familiar with that? Which is the public
stochastic,
demonization or dehumanization of a person or group by an influential figure using indirect, vague, or coded language that increases the likelihood of a statistically probable but individually unpredictable act of violence.
right? So there's kind of two realms to that, and if you mean more the social media or media presentation form of it, I don't think that this applies to that kid. If you mean like a mentor and he was groomed
Well,
in that kind of
I think
regard,
that
then
people
I think,
always think of it as just coming from the media, but personally, I see it as all the things because it's like the control
what
over, for instance, over Hollywood and the TV shows that everybody like. There's been an increasing amount of stochastic terrorism happening just in the movies that have come out in the past 10 years. Like, there's this weird incitement of and I don't know if you saw this recent thing that just came out about it's really targeting young men and toxic masculinity. What is it called? It's about this kid in England who turns out he's just really mad at women and he kills this girl or something. And it's like I'm telling you that it's like programming the fact that these things exist out in the public, and then they give people these reasons like my mom, for instance. They see this stuff and they're like, this is the way the world is. Holy shit. These people are they really are the enemy. right? And that's the whole goal of stochastic
I,
terrorism. It's to use coded language. It's to use
yeah, I mean,
it's everything. It's the media. It becomes your mentor. Uh,
so well, like I was saying with this kid in particular, the indications are really not there for it to be a media driven type of influence, more so a personal mentor or a an actual person entity in life exerting some kind of influence over him makes a lot more control. I mean, if you
well,
look
his
at
trans friend, his boyfriend, I think maybe
yeah, but
could have
that's
had a lot of
see
influence on him. We definitely have a lot of influence by
yeah,
relationships.
so and if you wanted to target this does go into a conspiracy theory. If you wanted to target a kid like that, then you'd have to know their background and basically go look for them or start grooming them from a young age. And if we consider earlier, talking about having an effect on children and embedding ideas, ideologies, and things like that in children, that being the easiest way to do that, then there's the idea of sleeper agents. There's the idea of mind control through long-term exposure. There's the idea of all of these different things that could come into play. But if you just look at the human behavior itself, the person himself, the activities, if you look at the evidence as it builds up, it does not, by all metrics that I'm putting together, it really does not add up as a angry, displaced youth
No, exactly.
that
No, I'm in 100%
you know
agreement. I think that if you look at one of the biggest examples of this is the fact that that one video that they have of him where he's jumping off the building, that video has within its view the place um, where he would have crouched down and made the shot. But they don't include any of that. They don't include him taking down the weapon. They only release the part where he's running halfway across the building and then jumping down. And what to me that implies is that there's an FBI level integration with this event. And I do think that have you ever seen that meme that went around for a while ago? Where it's all the Spider-Men pointing at they're all pointing at each other like you're the problem, and then it says like terrorist, bomber, or something underneath each one, and then it has one where it's like FBI, and it's like essentially it's I mean, there's also that case. I can't remember how long ago. I'm not very familiar with it, but it's the one where the FBI got caught uh, by essentially grooming this retarded kid. Somebody with developmental disability and neurodivergent, as they would call it today, and maybe at a subtle level. And essentially, they groomed him and gave him the bomb, and then it came back on them. And I think that's like an early version of this, where they're actually getting caught. Whereas
yeah,
nowadays they've become way more advanced, and the FBI
oh
is
yeah.
definitely a tool for whoever is pulling these strings, the invisible hand again. Which I keep coming back to, but I do believe that's the kind of what we're both talking about. It's like there's
Well, it's interesting because there's another theory where the director of the FBI makes a reference about Valhalla, and
yeah, that's pretty
you know
weird
the
with that.
the 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 Valhalla links to this off grid, not in contact with the world place that's super um, protected and believed to be kind of like the witness protection of the hidden figures that of the world, and so it's like, well,
It's on some island, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so
I've
it's
heard of
like,
it.
so
I've heard seen references to it and stuff, and I wonder about that stuff too. I think there's all sorts of coded language going on all the time that we're just not quite aware of, and those could also be signals, right? Like in advanced intelligence systems, where I mean, not like human intelligence, but the intelligence agencies.
yeah.
They have all sorts of of codes and different symbols that they can use and methods that stem from spies, right? And the different things that they've learned through many decades of developing spy techniques where they can send messages uh, through newspapers or video games, and right, you could log on to a video game and interact with somebody there and send them a specific coded message. No one else would know what that means, but if they had already predetermined that if you say this, it means this, and then there's different types of coded languages always going on all around us, I feel.
That's why being clear, and breaking down even the idea of what we say, giving clear examples, um, and representing things as this may be true, using qualifiers, I think is just so important because the nuances of speech, if you're smart enough to know that you make a claim like Japan bombed China, and that's a bold claim and it's presented as true, right?
Uh-huh. Okay.
Um, Whereas if you say, I heard that Japan may have bombed China. So that's not nearly as bold, and it's saying I don't actually know, but this is information. I'm a third party ref in passing this information along. So in the nuances of those speech, you can distinct whether somebody's making a claim that they are claiming emboldened, or they're making a claim that is indicates it's not understood to be wholly true, or that it could be untrue. And so when people can't recognize the difference between those two things, then there's an entire breakdown in communication in society altogether. Because
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
one person, you start taking things out of context and dissecting speech like that, then it's easy to create division. And so the biggest division that we can have is by literally pitting the right against the left, and literally by by
That's my
means
point,
of,
though, in saying that it doesn't matter who did it. It doesn't matter really, on some level, and it's our reaction to it that, at least in this event. I mean, I think maybe it's a little bit of a surprise. I think there's a little bit of an unintended unity that's stemming out of this that was less intended. But I do believe the division to be the intent, and if it is that, then even reacting to it becomes like everybody's been given. This is what I see. Everybody's been
so
given just the right thing that fits their qualifier for. So like all the conspiracy theorists, there's just enough information of something more than meets the eye that hits their qualifiers, and they're all spinning around, and there's freaking thousands of videos now on just in this last week that have come out, and
right.
from
And so and
agents who come in, snipers, professional snipers, who are like, this has to be this, and and the entry wound versus the exit wound, and everybody's using all these qualifiers, and in my mind I see all this and I go, that's the intended reaction. This is that all this type of that, because that has a type of divisiveness inherent in it also,
well,
right?
it brings enough people to the table that want to know the truth for the truth, where, like you said, it doesn't matter who did it. I mean, it does, but what matters more, I think, is what you're saying, is that we find out who it is and why, and we do something about it. See, that
Well,
I would
if we can,
I
but
would
at the
agree
point where
with.
we don't have any, and we have to sort of surrender ourselves to a greater power and to God in a way, that I do think
Well,
that
life's gonna.
our best reaction is actually no reaction. Our best reaction, or to find love from it, and
Uh,
like something like that. If we
Investigate.
could do that, I'm all for accountability. I mean, I'm big into it. I don't see me being involved in it though in any way. It's like I'm
If a person wants to let love prevail, then that which oppresses it and subjects the world to fear would need some kind of remedial activity.
No, I
They're
agree,
not
but
just
there's some of
naturally
it
going
is
to
out of our control,
counterbalance.
you
So,
know.
but yeah, with the empowerment of truth, better choices can be made, and that really is the way to a more loving society, because a society where everybody knows the truth and has an understanding of it through educational and informational means, with that awareness comes a unified type of responsibility and accountability to either let something happen or to not, and to make those types of choices. But if they're uneducated and unaware, then they become literal, like we've talked about, types of pawns, and
Have you checked out that guy
it's
James Lee? He's been doing some pretty interesting exposés on
name
James Lee.
names are like labels for me. Labels or
Well, I mean,
song or
he's
band. I
been
just
saying
what's
exactly what you're
always
saying. He did a guest host for Jimmy Dore
I'm
today,
just yeah. So I'm
and
not
Jimmy
necessarily
Dore is
gonna.
pretty good. He's one of these guys who like looks at things outside the box, and he's gotten most of this stuff pretty right
Yeah,
over the
I'm
past
just I'm
couple
just usually
decade.
terrible with names. So I may have
You've
seen
probably
somebody
seen
talk.
this
I
guy.
may,
He kind of I don't know.
but
I
I've
think he
seen
got popular on TikTok,
thousands.
but I'm not on TikTok really. I've that
Yeah, I
much.
don't use TikTok at all,
I wouldn't
or
recommend it. It's not something
Snapchat.
I recommend to people. Yeah, I never use Snapchat. Honestly, I
Yes,
don't use most of them. Uh,
I mean I like kind of the idea of just personal texting for certain with certain personal friends, stuff like that, with my phone, like my phone number, and then other than that, it's basically pretty much just Facebook and email, and I like to keep it really simple in those regards, where I'm not spread thin between all these different accounts, and but then I can go use platforms to look up information and have way less of a bias in terms of what answers I get, especially if I'm deleting
yeah, well, you can
or
always
using
reference
different
me
different
because
accounts.
I'm pretty. I've been following this stuff since I've had more free time, and I only quit my job earlier this year that I had my welding job, and because it was becoming such a toxic workplace, and I, I started making videos, and I was kind of decided to go this route of just making nothing for a while and getting a little bit more deep into the weeds. But I'm also very familiar with, like, I've watched fucking every TV show out there, and or of the ones that interest me, and I've spent a lot of time just looking at content from other people, and a lot of time on YouTube, and so I'm very familiar with the people who are out there saying the right thing. Well, you watch Candace Owens. I like Candace Owens too. So I don't know about her thing with the. I don't know. She spent a lot of time on that thing with Brigitte Macron. I don't necessarily see the
She gets into her
relevance of that.
tangents.
That's like it's not that
She
interesting to
gets
me.
into these tangents and has an explorative
Like I don't
mind,
even
and
care about that at
she's
all. You know what I mean? Whether
she's
or
yeah. I
not
mean,
Brigitte Macron
she
is a
got
man or not. I mean, there's so much of that around anyway. It's like I just take it for granted. Yeah, sure, they probably are, but doesn't even matter. I don't even care. You know what I mean? I do like how she's
yeah.
done
I
some of
mean,
the. I mean, that's cool. She was able to. She's big enough. She's like really huge, right? So, dude, did you see her
well,
thing on Michael Jackson?
and how Michael Jackson was innocent and all that. Yeah.
I thought
So
that was a good one. I thought that the
yeah.
whole
So
time. I was always like, I
well,
think this
that's
guy's
what I'm kind
innocent.
of trying to get at is Candace Owens' career got huge because of political involvement and discussion and stuff like that. But after parting ways with Ben Shapiro, she really
Yeah,
made her
Daily Wire.
own in a lot of ways. She really made her own, and there's a segment that she did where she was
Absolutely,
really clear.
totally agree.
She said, you know what, I got famous off politics, but I am who I am. I'm interested in these other things, and this is what I'm going to do. And if you're not interested, that's cool, and right on. And if you are, I'm going to go into these things. Like she did a deep dive into JFK. and she made a
Yeah,
whole
like that too.
couple
Yeah.
segments on that. And so she's got her own, and a lot of people, they say she went off the rails, she had kids and blah blah blah. But really, she got the opportunity to be more of herself with what she was
She got
doing.
more
And
honest
yeah, and
with
she's
what happened.
and that's something that I really appreciate is you can see she's genuinely hurt, she genuinely loves Charlie, and she really just wants to know the truth. I think she has some pent up bias against Israel that definitely has to be taken into account in terms of what she's looking into and the way
Well,
she's
she's
looking
on
at
the
it.
same thing. She's honest. She's talking about the uncomfortable truths that other people up until recently have completely been ignoring. I mean, they have such
But then there's Megan Kelly
totalitarian
saying,
control, Well, she's been pro-Israel up until just recently, completely, dude.
yeah, yeah.
Megyn
And
Kelly's
so,
like totally, what do you call it, toeing the line. And only
yeah, and so,
recently has I heard her say anything. Only actually since the Charlie stuff came out have I ever really heard her
so
question Israel.
Charlie's been offending, the liberal left for several years.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Trump already won. It really, and if anybody's really going to like look at Charlie Kirk as a target for what Tyler claimed he did it for in his statement, it makes no sense because if you're going to well research Charlie Kirk, it's inevitable that you're going to discover, that he
I don't know, man, because if you just take my mom as an example, hopefully she can't hear me. Hold on. So
but your
anyway, I
mom's
shared.
pretty upfront about her opinion, right? Straight, like you could easily tell by looking at her social media or talking to
She's
her
not on
where
there.
she.
All she does is consume New York Times and MSNBC and Midas Touch, and so Midas Touch. I happen to see this stuff in real time because I mean, I can't avoid it. She's like blasts it. And anyway,
um,
the like that program is bizarre, dude. Have you ever heard of that one? It's like I think
which one?
it's called Midas Touch. It's a total. It's one step beyond MSNBC and New York Times because it's actually super PAC funded media. So their only purpose is to be anti-Trump, right? Like that's their whole purpose in life, and it's like a whole
Yeah, I don't. So I
multi-million
don't.
dollar organization, billion maybe, I don't even know that that when you have something like that, it's like every person that they bring on has that mo. So nobody's honest, right? The difference is that's why I find Candace Owens to be very good on certain things. And the other guys, like this guy I just mentioned, James Lee, he's one of these new ones who just came around. He started doing stuff on the LA riots. That's the first time I saw him. I saw some things popping up on he makes these videos where he's got a hat on and he's like Chinese looking or maybe Japanese. And uh, he's kind of young. He's got handsome guy, and he wears this funny like fisherman's hat. And then he sits there and
That's
does these videos where he's like, "Okay, this is the real thing going on with the LA fires, like the LA riots." And then so I think he might be here in California, but it's these people who are honest, and they'll. I think that's the new media juice right now, right? Like the people who are actually doing that, and some of them might, like Candace Owens, come from a place like Daily Wire is completely one sided. That's like they're just like a Israel propaganda machine, pretty much. Ben Shapiro, he's just a total mouthpiece for Israel. I mean, and he's a total hypocrite too because he'll turn around and I mean, his whole platform initially was. Uh,
Republican conservative, yeah. And then
Yeah, and then but then it turns out that underlying, and then now it's so blatant. He just it's like Israel, protect Israel at all costs, and it feels like his whole
yeah, just
platform is the whole Daily Wire, right? And I think that wasn't that the actual reason why Candace left was because she questioned Israel, and then they
it's
kicked
funny.
her out.
She made a post that said basically genocide is wrong.
Yeah, That's what I'm saying. So it's like
And then,
and then that was a wake up call for her because I mean, who can't look at that honestly and say that? I think
well,
almost
I mean,
everybody does, right?
it's like how do you say you're feeling guilty about something without saying you're feeling guilty about something? Because it's similar in the
Especially
way.
when you're trying to create a platform about honesty, right? So it's like up until then, I don't think she realized that there was a disconnection happening, that she was actually, or I don't think maybe they didn't realize that she was going to be this, have this much of a follow through with the, you know what I mean? It's kind of like one thing to say, hey, okay, your whole program that you're going to do you're going to have a daily show, this daily program where you talk about truth and that's going to be, you can do that, and then it's like, oh shoot, yeah, but you can't talk about that one thing. Whoa, you're out of here,
Yeah,
like.
and that's the thing about when you emerge from kind of a doctrinated system of belief, and which she did, going from liberal to conservative, um, or democratic to conservative. Uh, when you free yourself from that kind of,
I lose you. Oh,
the idea is to transition her away from their thinking to their new, hey, put this model in front of you and go with this. And as she's moving away from one ideation, then she's more likely to gravitate towards theirs. But having freed her mind once before, she's likely to do it again. And
right,
that's the thing.
exactly. Well, that's how you get somebody to change, is you sell them a truth, right?
Yeah,
That they
yeah.
can identify with, and then if that person has a type of internal dialogue and internal, where they question themselves, they're likely to look at other truth. And it's almost like when you do that, you start the cascade effect. You start the water going down the stream, and then it just kind of sometimes doesn't stop. It's inevitable, actually, that people like that actually get created by the very forces that are trying to form them, into them and to absorb them into their purpose. Yeah,
Yeah, and so Candace Owens, like I did pretty much stop watching her content because a lot of it wasn't exactly relative to things that I was pursuing or interested in at the time. But occasionally, like the JFK thing and some of her other stuff, I did stay up with. And it wasn't to that she went off the rails and was crazy. She just had other interests and was enjoying life
sure.
and felt at peace and happy. She was happy that Trump won. She was happy that Charlie was doing his thing. She kind of was like, I don't want to be this black woman Republican figure. He's more like, I want to be Candace Owens figure, and she really came into her own identity in a lot of ways. So I don't think she went off the rails. I think she really just came into herself and stopped trying to live the identity that other people were trying to create. And then now with what's happened, I think the investigator, the intellect in her is really going to be applied. Like I said, there's the bias of her previous experience that be could be applied to like this narrative that she's looking at, but at the same time, the narrative she's looking at makes sense.
Oh yeah, totally. See, I don't see it as even what you said. I see it as like when if you're a content creator, um, you have slow weeks and hot weeks kind of thing, or good days and bad days of where there's really something juicy that you've got a piece of, because there can only be so many people who I don't know why that keeps doing that. Can you hear that when that happens?
Yeah, I don't know what it
Okay.
is.
It's
I
my
guess
it's my
maybe.
phone doing the recording thing somehow, but I guess it's telling me every like 20 minutes or something like that. Uh, anyway, the to me, it's just like the slow week phenomenon. It's like that's why she talked about like Brigitte Macron. It's like you're, and it also has to do with your producers and the people that you're working with, and what they present to you, because she's a team of people, right? And then so they'll be like, oh, we think this is a juicy thing to talk about, and she's like, yeah, nah, maybe not, or okay, well, let's just go with it, and we don't have anything else to talk about. But I really liked I thought the Michael Jackson thing was juicy uh, because I had already thought that. I just sensed it back when that stuff happened, and I thought it was really interesting. What once again, and this for her,
I never looked into Michael Jackson all that much.
I
Never
didn't
was a
either. I never
huge.
even checked him out. I didn't even like Michael Jackson. I didn't. So to me,
Yeah, I
I
was
saw all
never.
this stuff happening, and I just assumed, oh, I guess he's a pedo. I don't know. I don't even care that much, so I'm not really paying attention. But
Yeah,
then when I saw
never.
the people coming after him, after his family or whatever money afterwards, what's that?
Yeah. Well, I was just saying, like I really never, because I wasn't into his music. He was kind of a thing that was a background topic for me as I went through life, and it was never a big deal. Though my general perception of the entire thing was basically he was pop star, had very eccentric, unique personality traits, and probably some issues. But in the way that he interacted, he just was so genuine about loving everybody and just kind of becoming this like child's toy essentially. As the years got on, he just was this soft
Yeah, he was a
person.
kid who got given hormone therapy as a to mess with his throat to keep him
Yes,
sounding like a
so
young. And I think he went through some of the early type of hormone therapy that they had, whereas I
so
think they have more advanced stuff now. But with the stuff that he had, actually affected his whole body and his even his mind and stuff. But for Candace, I think bringing it back to that, I think one of the aha moment for her was in when she connected that there's an Israel connection again, right? There's like this. That's the people. The guy who was the head of Sony is this super powerful billionaire from or
oh,
whatever
I
multi.
missed that. I missed
So
that
for
part. I don't.
her, that was the thing that really woke her up, or another Israel connection, and it really is like the fuel that kept this thing going. Right, for her, it's like, oh shit, this stuff has been happening a really long time. Like, and because for Michael Jackson, it was all about the his ownership of the Beatles catalog.
Yeah,
Right, that's something
yeah, yeah. It
super
was.
valuable that he had in his possession that he had bought, and he had these kind of good goals. He wanted to do some of these good things and stuff, and it very interesting how if you like with her reporting revealed was that that guy he got somehow written in the will for to get that stuff. And it was like, what the f? Because Michael Jackson had come out and said, hey, I'm being attacked by Tony, whatever his name is, Tony something from Sony, and that they're killing the music industry, and he had come out publicly saying that stuff. So it's almost following the same MO, this same sort of pattern that we keep seeing over and over again, which I think was what you're drawing a connection to with Charlie, right? Like it's like he had just come out saying this stuff, which definitely leads to some kind of connection with Israel that
Yeah, I
they
mean
have this
that.
pattern. They do this stuff over
I
and
mean,
over again.
just looking at the expression on Charlie's face, and after watching, hundreds of hours of his videos, over a long period of time, and going back and forth, and um,
There's an evolution
what,
there.
yeah, what I thought about him, and how I felt about things he said, because there was parts of me that are like, okay, how, in terms of his faith and his beliefs, how strict is he with other people? Is he actually tolerant? Like, and if you like, just how does he treat different points of view? He's obviously going to stay firm in his principled belief and faith, but as he takes facts in, it's like I saw a few times where he's like, "Yeah, you changed my mind about this," or "Yeah, I'm taking this in," and to be
Sure,
humble like that is you engage in just like it just helped build so much respect. And so
totally.
you know for these expressions that I was seeing, and just kind of getting to know him by observing him in so many different situations over a long period of time, when he's talking about Israel, he's literally disturbed and upset, and it does kind of remind me in terms of how he's talking about how I felt in that first experience of kind of racism, where it's like my friends, it turned out, were actually racist and actually hated this kid because of his color of skin, and I just kind of innocently played along with him because I had no idea. And then when I found out, they just kind of rose up this huge conflict, and the expressions, you know, were consistent in terms of what I could tell. Just somebody that it was like, oh man, I just found out that my Israeli, friend that I thought was really on the same page with me is actually racist, or would actually engage in genocide, and that's what this really is. And this is a Zionist expansion, and blah blah blah, and like all of these things. And that, it's just like I've seen him in so many other situations where he's talking, and he was never disturbed like that when it came to his principality, but in those discussions he was disturbed when it came to his own principality. And I think that that's the biggest thing to me when it comes from what he said. And I've watched several different interviews where he actually starts talking about, it's not just one, but it's like in the last couple months he started
Yeah, he's
talking
there's
about Israel like
quite a
a
few
lot.
things where it came out in
And
at the end of certain podcasts and different videos that he'd made and or made with other people.
the circulation of those videos was very low compared to a lot of his other ones, though I had noticed until very recently. So even just like in the last couple of days, those are surfacing more and circulating more, and I think there's going to be a lot more investigation going
I
on.
mean, just
I
six
would hope
months
so.
ago though, he was pretty darn headstrong for Israel still, or six
Well,
to eight
that's where
months
his
ago.
con.
Like it's something that only recently happened because I had trying to remember
Well,
like
that's
it was somebody had brought up. Well, it was at the remember that Turning Point USA conference where and then Dave Smith did a debate with him and Josh Holland. Did you see that? So
I
that was
I
really
probably
interesting.
have
And that was so
I've
Dave
probably at
Smith is
least seen
like he's like
clips of it.
he's called a people call him a self-hating Jew or whatever, things like that. So he's Jewish, but he's anti-Israel or he's anti-Zionist Israel, right? So, and he'll call out these tactics, and then he does. He's a real good
Well,
debater. He has
my
a good
my
program, and then
understanding
at that
was that
thing, dude, if you check it out, it's really interesting because the Charlie Kirk is
my under,
like, no,
my
man,
understanding
don't
was
don't even
that
bring that up. I don't want to kind of go there, and we just all know that you know something
yeah, my
something
my
about October
understanding
7th and
is that yeah, my understanding is that Israel has kind of been divided within itself between
oh,
the
absolutely,
Zionist movement and
totally. There's a
just
bunch
like
of good Jews out there, and there's a lot of
so
good
it's
things in the Jewish culture actually. Uh,
yeah,
to be
so
honest,
it's really hard, for Charlie in that kind of situation to sort through that. And I think that's what he was like
sure.
going through for a while, and ultimately coming to the choice of this is bad, this is wrong, I can't stand by this, and as a man of principle, I have to
Well, he's young
say
too, so he
something
doesn't
and do
have
something.
the life experience that some of these other Jewish people growing up through it can see the sort of embedded hypocrisies going on, and then so they're more able to call it out. The what's that one guy's name? Norman Finkelstein. You ever seen him?
Um,
He's like a Jewish guy who goes. He wrote a book on it, and he goes out and talks, and then people will scream at him, and he's been out there for years though doing this stuff. So he was, a lot of these
I
people like him, there were right at the beginning of. They've been screaming about Gaza, yeah, in people's face about it, writing books, doing interviews for many many years, and then, and he's older though, right? He's and so Charlie was young, and it's like it makes sense. It's like it takes time to come to this stuff, but if you are a person of faith and going down the path of finding God or something, it's almost natural that you're going to run into this, I think, you know. And I'm glad it all
Well,
happened. I think
yeah,
it's like it's interesting. It makes the story better. It makes the uh
the sad thing about it is that he didn't really understand when I guess there was significant investments from these Israeli donors and things like that. He didn't quite understand who was providing this funding. I
yeah, the
remember
Bill
him
Ackman thing where apparently they had an intervention with him. So
Oh
it's
yeah,
like
where Bill
he
Ackman just went off on him for 12 hours or something.
yeah, and had a
Kind
whole
of he
bunch of
felt in the
people, some other
Hamptons.
support. Yeah, and that just happened
Yeah,
like right before this kind of turnaround with him. So, or right around the same time as, and so it's all. Oh no, I think it was a response to him coming out and saying some of this stuff. So it's like that's what the intervention part of
yeah.
it was, like to say, hey, you know, you need to shut the f up.
So I mean, the interesting thing is like Charlie's gone out for years, and he's really just engaged with these people who they throw hate at him, but probably know in their hearts that he wishes them no ill will and is not actually like a threat to them. But he's just a place for them to project their own anger in response to feeling isolated
You mean like
and
the with the
individualistic.
race and the trans stuff and the
Yeah, all
yeah.
that, like a lot of those people, they really don't have it in them to go through and do something like that. They're more, like I said, the triggered or the targeting type
Well,
of
those were
people where,
the reason why those that exists. If you ask me, this goes back to the stochastic terrorism. So what those were the platforms of the left over the past decade, and so there's a ton of people that are enraged with all this false information. It's just like Stephen King coming out and saying, "Oh, he said that gays should be stoned." There's like nowhere where he ever said there may be some kind of loose maybe he was joking and said something, and that who knows what it was, but I haven't yet seen the reference where that has any validity. And you just know in your heart he never would have said that. That could only be something taken out of context. And then Stephen King had to come out and say, "No, I didn't say that." And now nobody's going to see his movie because people have been pissed off at Stephen King for a while because he's keeps saying all this dumb liberal stuff on Twitter. And
dude, he's so fucking old, and I think he's just got dementia and had this party loyalty, and he's lost.
yeah, totally. Like Robert De Niro.
I think his internal monologue, instead of putting in terms of putting words together and kind of creating this narrative, I think that's still present in him. I think it's just affected by these ailments, and he's literally just kind of going off about some shit
But all these
because
kids
he's
that were arguing with Charlie Kirk, I think that's all that they're filled with that same type of sound-bited clips that make him sound worse, things that they could use because those were um, the platforms that the left was have been using. They decided to go deep and double down on the whole and use the trans issue to to
well,
gain that whole
that's the thing
side of
about it
this
though.
developing cultural topic, and because that helped create a side, they decided to go with that side. And then once you do that, then you need to create enemies. You need to find some people who typify the opposite belief system, and then you create a bunch of stochastic terrorism, a bunch of false information about that person that has these common characteristics. It dehumanizes it's you, and you fill these people with it, and then that's why they would have so much of the arguments that you see from these young black kids or trans kids is them saying stuff that he didn't say to him, or just telling him that he's a fascist or that I hate you and things like that, and without actually understanding him. And then when some of them he turns around, and that's because his talking was working. That's what makes him the most dangerous. That's the reason
Well,
why
and
you take him out.
it's going to continue to work too. I mean, just like everybody keeps saying, there's millions of people jumping in line to continue voicing for free speech, for the betterment of the country, for conservative values, for their faith, for Christianity, for all of, the same causes, but also different causes from Charlie's. And so we're going to see an emerging wave of people that are expressing those same sentiments and spreading it
Oh
as a
yeah,
result.
and yeah, yeah, and that's
So
what I meant by too. It's also a little bit the response is actually way more of a collective unity than I think could ever have been predicted, right? And even the media still is like stuck on these things, like the way that they're
I had
going
noticed,
off on the Jimmy Kimmel thing, right? Oh, it's like
I
that's
had
it's just
noticed
such a
that
bizarre thing that they have to just keep. All of a sudden they'll switch. Oh, now we're talking about free speech, right? When
well,
they didn't talk
it's
about free speech when we were getting all our rights taken away from us during and getting these fake injections and stuff during COVID, or when Twitter files came out and it was like, oh, something against conservatives, and they come out and they're saying, oh, it's a nothing burger, and that's like all that was through the liberal media. Then it's like, oh, they don't care about free speech then.
it was it was interesting because about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, somewhere in there, I had noticed, having a collective of friends that were Democrat, Republican, many liberal, but not so much the kind of metropolitan liberal or extreme liberal left that we see, but just having liberal or libertarian values. Just a broad spectrum of friends that I had, and I just noticed through talking with them that an emergence of the being kind of an adult single straight male values were kind of being coming out and servicing as men started being treated pretty poorly in society by women as a result of feminism going too far in many different ways. um, that across the
Yep.
board on that issue, a lot of us guys, we really related to that, and a common person that it would come up would be Charlie Kirk, and that they would agree with, you know, kind of going back to the old fashioned methodology of not sleeping around and having monogamous relationships and developing something strong and staying in marriages and having children. And because the majority of men that I know, it's like, yeah, I just want to have a family, dude, and raise them and do my thing, and then it's cool. And being a parent that's raised my kids, to the extent I have so far, and them emerging as adults very soon, it's definitely a, the most fulfilling part of my life. So
What is?
having kids, having a family,
Yeah, yeah,
like,
man. I know.
yeah,
So jealous.
like in some ways, I'm also kind of, because I never got married, right? And I'm also kind of thinking about it in terms of like, well, I spent 20 years raising children, pretty much. Yeah, 20 years raising children that, and a bunch of them were not mine, but my own as well. And now I emerge and I'm about 40, and it's like I could actually meet a woman, have a wife, and fulfill like that part of my life. That's still a possibility. Um, but yeah, I mean, and if she wanted to have children, I don't know, that'd be a big road for me to cross when we got there. But um, the idea being that it's kind of a biological value for a lot of men, is to have families and protect them, and it is certainly a social construct that's kind of built into the family and the views of America and American values. So eating away and eroding at that is going to constitute a destabilization of the idea and ideation of society that we live in and the country we live in, what's okay and what's, appropriate and not appropriate. And it starts going in all kinds of directions from there. So the thing about it is that even with all the directions it went, the men that are in these different ideologies still feel biologically driven and still have these values. And Charlie Kirk really spoke to that. And there's other truths as well, like, a man just standing in his principality and standing in his principles, standing in his faith, not wavering in that, but being kind and accommodating to others and non-combative was a very mature and respectful thing that earned tons, so just all the faucets of values that open themselves, because those are also values that are being projected. Hey, if you want to debate and we'll be respectful. And I think there's a lot of receptivity on the Democratic side that's just got to warm up to it in terms of the,
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe. I
well,
think.
I'm not talking about the extreme leftists. I'm talking about, I'd say,
Well, I think the average person is so filled with all this dark information, this thing that's happening through TV, and so you see it in the writing of the actual programs. And so, like that one I was talking about, I remember now. It's Adolescence, and it just won an Emmy, I think, right? And also, you notice like as soon as it came out, it's like so it's a fake story, it's fiction, right? But people see this stuff and they see it as truth. They see it, and they don't even realize what they're doing is. So here's this fiction story. The fiction story is designed to really enrage people about toxic masculinity. And what happens is if you watch a few stories like that, it just becomes truth for you without you actually having a truth to reference. You don't need that anymore. You have this uh, sort of abundant buildup of this false truth being presented, or I should say, it's not false truth. It's a expanded or exaggerated truth, right? And then that actually becomes the reference point. So all these people who you would see arguing with Charlie Kirk, or that you might see now, I mean, all this stuff, it's only been increasing. All these guys have just doubled down, like on whether it's, I mean, some people are uh,
uh,
getting
uh,
fired, but they're the few, and they're, whatever. The left's always gonna freak out
I've,
over people when their people are getting fired and stuff. But if you
I've
actually
had
look
the
at Hollywood, it's extremely controlling and has been for a long time. Like they completely control the narrative of what they
I've had the
push out.
privilege of knowing quite a few people, more than I would have thought. Quite a few
Drives me
people
crazy.
that are not on social media, that don't use their cell phones. They have flip phones, and phone calls only. And their education is through books. They don't watch TV. They don't even have TVs. They don't have laptops. They have somebody to do their like stuff like that, or they're retired and stuff. And I've got the privilege of knowing quite a few people that are literally not exposed to any of the social media platforms. They don't have them. They don't use them. And their mentality and their maturity level and their understanding of people and society and how things work is so grounded,
Of course, that's a
that
proof of what
it's
I'm saying. That it's coming from these locations. It's where the stoking of this fire is in their soul. Is through these mechanisms, which are, and it's also because of the way that the profit motive works inside of these dying media companies and stuff, where essentially the only thing that really works is selling outrage. The more outrageous, like that video was talking about that you shared, the Chase Hughes video where he's talking about psyops in, underlying the goal being to.
yeah, all of those people are not engaged in politics
Sure, so they're
or
going to be like
civil
the most
affairs.
balanced people,
Well,
right?
yeah,
Or
unfortunately, they're also the ones that kind of like the political system needs the most because they're grounded. If you talk to them about politics, what you're actually talking to them is about issues, not people, but issues. Like, well, what do you think about Israel and Gaza, they'd say, like, well, most of them would say, well, really, it's a sad thing to hear about when I hear about the things that go on there, but I don't know well enough to go on to judge one way or the other.
They'll
You know,
also probably mostly be liberal because actually the real true left, because really these guys that we're talking about aren't the true left. You know what I mean? These people who are, they're actually authoritarian left. You know, what they really want is to tell you how to think. You know, and they're going to push the people who control the left wing media right now. Like that's all the authoritarian left. Whereas these people that are raised outside of social media, outside of uh, these media bubbles that exist right now, they're probably going to identify left because that is the more or more
people's choice,
commonly, yeah, it's the more common
people's choice.
freedom party, you know, where people might identify with or think that they're identifying with, and especially if they're not familiar with what's actually happening, then that even makes them somewhat dangerous because they might just sort of make blanket agreements and associations with something they don't even understand what's happening.
No,
Um,
most of these people, when something comes up like of a political nature in terms of figures, like you ask them about Trump, they're like, I don't know, he was this business guy, like he's the president now, and things are happening. Like they're just kind of most of them are very liberal in how they live, but they have different political values. A couple of them are extremely conservative, actually,
sure, you would,
very,
of
very.
course, have some that are going to come out that way. Of course, there's going to be a natural balance, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it's really cool to see that common values among people seem to prevail as long as other ideas don't interject with them. And a lot of social perception is influencing people to such an extent that they're confused about even who they themselves are. And even people going extreme right, to a certain extent, they'll get so far and be like, "Yeah, that's no bueno. I'm cool with more the centrist right or the centrist left," and kind of this healthy balance in between where it's okay to go on one topic and live with this idea and be compromising in this way or agree to this and to go to another and similarly compromise because it's not my values, it's that I'm compromising to whatever extent I agree to. And that's the whole idea of democracy, is that there's me and then there's the world, and we have an understanding and an agreement. Otherwise I need to find somewhere where my worldview fits. And the problem is with America is that we have so many people here for capitalistic ideas, and we have so many people here for religious ideas, and we have this melting pot of, like I said, we have like Muslims coming in and doing these things. We have Israel exerting influence. We've had a pretty constant back and forth with China economically and politically and many different affairs with Russia as well, and it's kind of overwhelming that with so much division in the United States, the biggest thing that's united the country in the past is to go to war. So that becomes a looming concern in terms of political strategy, and I was looking at Trump's history in terms of his party affiliations. And one thing in terms of like how he talks to people, has treated many people, his crass speech, like all of that, his personality just kind of set aside. If you really just observe like why he's going back and forth, for sure there's financial incentive at times, but I think what evolved for Trump was a person that genuinely cared about the state of the union. And to the best of his ability, coming from where he came from with his views, he really wanted to serve the people. And in many ways, maybe he's not fully apt to, like many presidents before him. They all have their strengths and weaknesses, but he's fucking human, and he's trying to do this job. And there may be procedural differences and things like that that I disagree with. There may be some ideas of approach and enforcement that I don't necessarily agree with in terms of some things not being very well thought out in how it interacts on a public relations type of level, with the swiftness in which things have been done and some mistakes that
Well, I
have
don't think there's
certainly
ever
been
been
made.
a president where, um, well, for one thing, I know that there's never been a president that existed in a time of social media. And the way social media has been able to be hijacked by both the left and the right in a way that completely cuts out information. We've always had rags, newspapers that are one side or the other, but the totality of the country was never able to be completely turned against a president so efficiently so that when he was in his first term, there was just this bizarre. I mean, he was completely infiltrated with his whole entire cabinet, all those people that were working against him, that one general who, like, I mean, they were coming out and bragging about this, and then all the stuff, all these, FBI things, being impeached twice, the so much turned against him. I think that brought out his some of his worst qualities. But but I agree. I think his intention was pretty righteous overall. I just didn't never really like him. I never cared about him. He's not a non-important figure in my
I
perception.
agree. Yeah,
Uh,
I agree. In fact, the presidency should really not unless it's we're in times of war or have extremely difficult diplomatic things to face, which we do during these times. And his personality may be difficult, but he's matured in the last 2 years in particular in terms of how he's conducting
yeah, he seems
himself. He's
better at.
matured.
Well, he knows more about how uh, I mean, how you have to accomplish what he's trying to get done. You have to be more uh, extreme about putting the right people in and holding them to it, to these different things. And I know he just put out a post. I think it's today, and then it got deleted from Truth Social, where he's calling out Pam Bondi, saying, um, why hasn't Pam Bondi done? You should got to go after these people. I've been, and he actually lists all the stuff that's happened to him and stuff, and then he deleted it afterwards. So I don't know what that means, but also it did have a certain kind of anger inside it, and I think there's a frustration there in him with the fact that no matter who he puts in place, certain things just don't get done. But also he did sell us on a whole no war thing, and he's already like been involved in a lot of different war talk. Also, he didn't really come around on. He keeps going off on this goddamn Operation Warp Speed. Really fucking pisses me
Well,
off
I mean,
because it's like who.
the
God,
political affairs of this country existed before he came back into office and have existed for a very, very long time as things evolve. The United States has been a big diplomatic player on the world scale, and we as a country have engaged in different things, and many good and many bad. And to come into an office like that with diplomacy being a big part of your function, where there's so many rather heavy things going on in the world surrounding the United States, and the obligations to that is pretty extreme
no, I
when
agree. I agree.
when the world itself has conditions that are pretty extreme. Because I see,
Well, like when the
all of
Doge
these.
stuff came out, though, I mean, come on. Like they literally, that was one of the best parts of, I think, of all this. That at that moment, at least, I had the most hope. Remember some people posting some stuff online and like, oh, what do you think about this now, or
I
something
know.
about his tariffs? But that Doge stuff was happening, and I really felt like, hey, now we're talking. Now we're this USAID stuff. Ooh, yeah, okay, this is the kind of stuff I want to see happen
Well,
because.
the right wing party has been divided itself among itself in several ways in the last 6 months. That's
Yes.
compartmentalized thing, with Elon
Well, they
Musk is
had to
taking.
keep their, yeah, exactly. They had to kick Elon out and stop that whole process. They had to allow the big beautiful bill to get going because all that stuff had been, like you say, it's a lot of the stuff is embedded so deeply in deep state, whatever you want to call it. It's part of something. It's all these non-elected officials, and so that's why Washington has the most billionaires, Washington D.C. per capita of anywhere in the United States. It's because of all the money, the big money that
The
exists
lobbying.
in the
Yeah,
lobbying and
it's
stuff. It's such a big engine that you just can't stop, like, and so they have so much power, and they're going to put in their Mike Johnsons and their different people that are going to push these kinds of, so, and but I got to admit, I mean, it was a little bit, it's disappointing to see if, because he did run on no war, and actually there's a point, what was it in the campaign trail for 2024, he
I'm a
mentioned a
huge
couple
fan of.
times
I'm
defunding
a
or
huge.
putting less into military, right? The military budget being, he like used that as one of his platforms talking about that. And then what did they do? They increased the Pentagon budget to $1 trillion basically, and it's like, holy fuck, damn, that's not what I wanted to hear. A little
Yeah,
disappointed
well,
in that.
the fiscal system is just fucked in itself. So it's a money machine, and the money machine is very much outside of the control of the president. The president only can exert so much influence, and really doesn't have enough say in the markets themselves to make that much of a difference. So, that's one element of it. That's just how things are set up.
No, and
So, yeah,
that goes
but
back to my point. I mean, I agree, but it goes back to my point of the fact that there's a hidden hand really controlling all. There's bigger people than the president, basically. People with more power,
bigger,
where
yeah,
they what they say gets done, and then
yeah, in different kinds of places. And the interesting thing is a lot of them are at odds, but some of them form these coalitions and say these
sure,
factions. They say, okay,
yeah,
well,
at the
yeah,
global banking level and stuff like that, at the
and
military industrial complex level, there's a lot of these coalitions of. They don't even have to have this. It's like that thing that George
it's the first.
Carlin said um, about conspiracies is like, you don't necessarily have to have a formal conspiracy. You just have to have converging interests.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, that's a simple way for things to come together and
Yeah,
get in
so
set in
they all
motion
want
for
the
sure.
same basic thing. They all want to increase their bottom line, especially when it comes to the military. It's super clear that's what's happening. It's just about keeping this military industrial complex going, and it's been happening. Everybody who's revealed it in any way gets iced. Right? That's
Yeah,
basically what happened with JFK. He came out and said, "Oh, I'm going to put a stop to the CIA. They're doing all this dark money stuff. It's bad." And that's exactly uh, what the guy who wrote "War is a Racket," uh, Smedley Butler. That's exactly what he said, and that's from 1920. It's like, shit, man. This stuff's been happening a long time.
yeah, it's very unfortunate, and I think there's only so much citizens can do individually, but collectively choices can be made. I mean, if there's really like Sharia law being practiced as a policy in a city in the United States, there's a huge fucking problem. That is a fucking like insane proposition. If that's actually true, and if it's like, how did we not know, or why are we not collective? Why has nothing been done about this until now?
Well, what's weird
I
about
think it's
that is some people. So I saw this guy who I like. He's got a show called Woman Propaganda, and I can't remember his name, but he's kind of he's like a young kid. He's a groiper. He's one of these Nick Fuentes guys, and Have you ever checked out Nick Fuentes? I like him on some things. He's just a really smart kid. He's got a great memory and
Yeah, I've
excellent
seen.
recall, but he misses the boat on a few things too. But he's definitely anti-Israel and stuff. But anyway, this guy, he goes up to Myron Gaines. You know Myron Gaines. He does the Fresh and Fit podcast. So he goes up to him because Myron was doing something similar to Charlie before all this stuff was happening. So he was going to these universities and doing the Charlie basically, right?
Yeah,
And so you'll see videos of Myron Gaines going up, the same as the Charlie videos, basically.
yeah.
So people
I think
coming
I've
up and
seen
talking,
some of
and
them.
he'll debate them, but it's usually on feminism. That's like his main dig. And so anyway, this guy who's this, you know, Groiper guy, he gets up and he says, "Hey, well, this feminism stuff's getting so bad. Do you think we should institute Sharia law?" And then I thought Myron's take was interesting, and he said, "Well, he laughed. He's like, oh, this guy's funny, and he goes, well, the problem is I don't think that Sharia law is compatible with Western culture, and that. So I hadn't. It's interesting because I hadn't
It's
heard this thing that you're talking about. I don't think he
it's
had.
directly in conflict with the Constitution, where justice is blind,
Sure,
and
that's exactly what he said. Basically, is that there's these, he's got some military background or law enforcement or something
it's
like that, and so he was like, "Yeah,
it's.
this just doesn't work." He's like, "But I get what you're talking about," because the other guy was bringing it up in the context
I mean,
of putting these women in their place, kind of thing, and
so
that
social
instituting
norm.
a social structure that actually was balanced again, and as a solution to this extreme feminism. So, and it's
So
I
one of
wonder
the
if
most
there's a connection there.
successful one of the most successful things that occurred in the United States evolved, and it kind of is this was ephemeral thing that it was the normative, um, rather than a construct. You had a social normative, and a normative would kind of form a little bit more naturally between people, where they would give each other common courtesy in public spaces, and there was just kind of this organic chemistry between people, where the live let live policy of the United States itself, its liberty, um, was freely understood until the point where it wasn't, until the point where people were influenced to believe that other people were physically imposing in into them, to the extent that they needed to react to that. And it's kind of been this engagement process, and that's what a lot of the social media fuels, is that divisiveness. And we've talked about, how the algorithms themselves are designed to show the controversial things that we're going to react to, or just kind of watch over and over,
Exactly.
or get hyper sucked into these topics and stuff. Um, so in order to kind of protect somebody or protect ourselves from that, it's really better to have just conversations with people. That's what I've been really more focused on, is instead of like,
Right. That's basically exactly what Myron Gaines said. I think in response to this, it's basically that the way. I mean that to recognize though that it is a problem. I think that though the inspiration of that guy saying that
but
it's
yeah,
it's
just
coming
just
from the
as,
same spot though, right? Of what you're talking about. Like the goal is to like there's a certain imbalance inherent in teaching children toxic masculinity, kind of, right? Like it's almost like, well, you don't want to teach them that and to be afraid of that. What we need to do is teach young men, young boys chivalry and teach them good uh, stewardship type of behavior, to teach balance and fairness, but also good judgment, and then teach them leadership and the actual traditional roles of being a man. I think that's a
well,
real.
yeah, there's a personal accountability level, and then there's also a social accountability level, and then there's also a civic. accountability level. And I think it's become very, very clear when it comes to voting in the United States. So if we have all these Muslim citizens and they may be illegally immigrating as well in mass, that could be happening and likely has happened. But if that is something that's happening and then they become voters, then we have people voting in to put in place policies that are in direct conflict with the Constitution and exactly what it's set forth to protect us from. And so it takes an
Well, especially if they're coming
American's
here, they're right. So it's like it's bringing back the connection between why this is the greater country, why people want to move here in the first place. So if they're going to come here, we should be able to better instill the values that make us that greater country. The reason why they would want to come here, but we can't change the fact that Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world right now, and it's statistically provable that it will at some point be the strongest religion in the world for whatever reason. I've only seen that statistical fact or a prediction. I guess it's not a fact yet. Uh, it's a
I
prediction.
mean, I've heard I've heard that Jews are gonna overpopulate the world, and I've heard that there will be emerging competing cultures, but as long as the United States continues to spread a free type of religious kind of environment and holds the reins economically and as a military world power, then the defenses of freedom of is actually still in place. And it's a kind of an unfortunate paradigm to consider that kind of we lead the way, but at the same time all of these conflicts are resulting and I'm not I'm not sure in terms of like quality of life and humanitarianism I could really be on board in with Islam.
No, I mean, I don't. Me either. I
And
think there's a whole bunch of things. There's a reason why I don't think it will ever overtake Christianity is the people itself, right? Like it's not gonna. I think it's the fastest growing religion from a statistical standpoint right now. Like the amount of, I think it's just the cultures. There's so many more
the
people that are
reproductive
having yeah,
processes,
yeah, that in that way it's just statistically growing faster than other religions. But the
yeah.
what I always thought was interesting, it's funny when you met me um, just recently. I'm basically kind of, I mean, I'm like, I mean, other than talking to you, I kind of recently gave up. I was like, I'm over it. Fucking tired of this. It's like it worked on me, all this stuff. It's like it's worn me down, you know? I'm like, I'm tired of
Yeah, to be
preaching, you know?
honest,
I'm tired of it. I got to a point where I kind of given up even. And
to,
like, that little post I put on Homestead thing, that was like one of my
yeah.
last hurrahs, dude. I'm like, I'm down to nothing. I only had one. I'm like, well, I only had one income source. I just lost that, dude, this week.
Well,
And
so
I lost my band, you know. It's like one of my only things holding me together, kind of. And the way I lost my band is from this stuff, from this very thing we're talking about, you know. It's has to do with this stochastic terrorism turning on to
well,
me, and
it's interesting because I completely avoided politics for years and years and years, and I was just very anti. Like when people would start getting, oh, how do you feel about Trump? And I'm like, I don't really care. I don't even want to get in. Like, it's not. So a lot of social conversations in terms of direct experience was more my focus, or esoteric explorations and philosophy and astrology and just, very broad, psychology, human interaction, human behavior, sociology, just all just broad scale interests that I just was but politics was one that I avoided
me too, exactly.
very, very much
I
for
I
years and
basically
years and
never
years.
said anything about it. I was just kind of go with the flow. I'm just like, oh, all this stuff is happening, but it's only the point where I hit a point of no return, a point of nothing left to lose, where I'm like, okay,
Well,
I guess there's no reason why I can't just come out and say what I think right now, because I ain't got nothing left to lose really anyway. I mean, and it's funny though because I have revealed that I did have a couple things to lose, and I'm gonna I lost those too now, but uh,
yeah, I think for me, it got to the point of recognizing like how many people are just so fucking wounded and just really need to heal and heal themselves. Um, in one way or another, it's spiritually, essentially, and just cleanse themselves of anything that's not really who they are and start fresh and get a very good, clear understanding of what the world is
yeah, I think it's
and
part of that's because you
and
live in
how
it where
things
you
work.
live or whatever, or maybe it's just because of here or something, but it's overtaken here, right? Over here, it's everywhere. So every business, it's just everywhere. And if you try and make a stand against it, you are a target. You got a target on your back, and the mob comes after you. And it has a stronghold here in this area, and it's been very frustrating
What,
for me.
wait, what kind of stronghold? What do you mean, like like political signs at every business and stuff like
Uh,
that, or
well, so yeah, it's just yeah. No, it's not that like they'll be. It's in the underlying component. It's in the conversations. It's the fact that everywhere is like this is just a very liberal county, I guess, you know. But actually, well, I'm in the town that has some element of. There's like a lot of Republicans that live here, but none of them that I know. Whatever. When I came from the coast, where it's like completely over there, it's almost 100%.
I think
Um,
one of the conservative values that I have is literally to conserve my energy and time and to not have negative experiences. I want to have positive, like happy experiences. So I try to avoid unnecessary conflict and the interesting thing is like if I can see that a person has a maturity to have a difference of views and opinions and that I say what I believe, they say what they believe and try and understand each other, then that's great. Uh, but if somebody can't kind of return that kind of respectful discourse, then I don't see any point in wasting my time talking to them if they have any other kind of agenda, really.
I mean, I grew up here. I just have a lot of friends that that anyway, be at a party or something, and there's been a kind of a constant. I'm total like conspiracy theorist from the early days, so I like talking about that stuff, and I'll share different certain things, and I'll just kind of always be getting shut down and by people, and I take it for a grain of salt, no big deal, and then something where I start putting myself out there a little bit more, then all of a sudden, like, so only recently has everything turned on me like that. It's a new phenomena, but it has a lot to do with me putting myself out there. Also, it's very prominent. So here in the music industry here, which I was fairly prominent in for a while, it's just overtaken by that. Like, and it's got a I don't know, it draws me to the surface sometimes. So I might say something to some something or just reflecting on, hey man, that's just a very violent reaction, you know, or something, and then the dogs will come out at me, and I've learned to try and avoid that. But then, like I said, as of recently, I've really turned up the heat, and then everything's kind of turned on me. And I think like with my band, for instance, like that's part of it, right? So everything the reason I got kicked out of the band is not specifically for anything I've said recently. It's more of a buildup over time of things that they don't want to deal with or address, and the fact that I'm just very honest. I'm truthful, and I
Mhm.
reflect an honesty that I can't avoid. I don't know where it comes from. It's like I'm very honest about things. So And then I find myself in these conversations if somebody says, well, I know that these tariffs are going to, ruin us or whatever. I'm like, well, how do you know that? Why don't you let it play out for a little bit? Let's see what happens, and just stuff like that has really positioned me. I mean, I've been doing that for forever. I'll do it to both sides, right? I'm not uh, and that's the other funny thing about it, at least for me. I've whatever is going on around here. I mean, maybe it has a lot to do with the music thing. Like the people who have power here in the music industry are very deeply embedded into this kind of thinking, and everybody just goes along with it, man. And I can't help but draw the connection to. I did a report last year, not a report, but uh, a whole uh, kind of research video that I did on and a deep dive into 1984, the book, a book review, I guess you'd call it. But it was different than that. I was just relating it to now, and what do they call it in the book? They call it uh, why can't I think of it right now? Wrong think. Right. So like I couldn't help but draw the connection to like that's what everybody's doing right now. They're all the wardens in the prison, you know, keeping me in line, keeping me from doing wrong think. And even putting that video out like really rubbed a lot of feathers. And I have a couple
Really?
people that really like keep targeting me, attacking me, attacking me, attacking over and over and over again. Always the same thing. You're being really aggressive. Everything you say is really hurtful or something. And I've always been
I
pretty
think
careful.
maybe one or two videos or expressions I saw came off, uh, uh, pretty bold. But other than that, especially your recent stuff's been like kind of almost overly soft in some ways. It's like joy and love, 100%. But there's a reality to life, things that are going on in the world that are pretty not joyous and loving, that have an effect on our daily life and how people treat each other. And so for me, like I said, I wasn't political, and I really avoided it until I noticed the extent to which people are suffering and how they're treating each other has gotten to the point where it's like, whoa, why is there all this divisiveness, and what is going on, and why are people at each other's throats? And Trump has been, was originally portrayed as like this catalyst that just divided the nation and stuff like that, but really it didn't have anything to do with Trump, but it had everything to do with the media that drove Trump as an issue. And so the culprits behind the direction and the attention of the country, if you start talking in the news about this world movement for peace, for example, and that becomes just this ongoing topic. Oh, these people are doing this amazing thing, and let's look at this, and it's actually proven that you can change focus just like that, and a lot of people can start moving in this positive direction. And so giving the movement of people's reaction to Charlie Kirk's death in a way that's unifying people of different views, where somebody that was going to be his opponent and argue against him shared this really polite invitation that Charlie had written to him to come onto his show, and said he had respect for him, even though they disagreed in a lot of things. He had a lot of respect for Charlie and for who the character of Charlie was. And it's those kinds of things that are, vitally important to recognize in terms of not just Charlie Kirk, but really how a good example of how people can interact. So social normative of treating people with kindness and respect, and bringing that back, and just being firm in principalities of that can literally make a huge change, um and
Yeah, but I guess
this
my point of what I was saying is like where I'm at, or whatever, like there's a certain controlling aspect over kind of a continuous forced into and so like I started making videos and for a while I was just making these kind of like Zen videos. I got no traction, like almost nobody. A couple of them I wrote really well. That one I sent you today was one I just thought was a funny one because I busted out the dictionary, and that one I would try and incorporate some of my little wisdoms and stuff. But
Oh,
uh, but the only reason that was the only stuff that I could get some of my friends to like go, oh okay, I thought that was okay or whatever, and there's a certain kind of like I'm forced into this bubble of behavior, and it's hard for me to avoid, because of where I live, I guess, and probably because of living under my mom's roof too,
I
and
think when it comes to the point that I see people reacting to each other pretty severely in a public in life, where severe judgments are made about and assumptions are made, and people are afraid of each other, and how like just the general social interactions, the shift in the last 15 years in particular, um, where even this certain age group of like 22 to 35, and especially going through college, where this huge amount of kind of animosity comes from, and uh but there's a lot of energy to be directed there, and utilizing that through social media. Charlie Kirk in a lot of ways kind of provided balances to what was happening on the campuses, and now it's going to happen in mass because a lot more people are taking up the mantle of what he started.
sure.
So hopefully through those kinds of
Yeah, I mean,
conversations.
I actually put out something about 2 months ago, maybe 3 months ago, probably, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, where I was tried to start a debate thing around here, and I got kind of far with it, but I couldn't get anybody to do it with me, basically. Like it was just nothing outside of like empty online arguments, but nobody who would follow through. And I had this one guy I really wanted to get going where he would do it with me, and I could see a value in it. This is before Charlie Kirk's thing. I was just, quite a bit, and part so, but like I say, it has to do with kind of this location. I think there's just I couldn't. I've made some formal organization around it, came up with a name, and I decided to try and use the libraries as like my first locations, and I have all the gear too, right? So I was kind of like making some plans around it, and then I just got a lot of pushback on it, and you know, I had this feeling of, maybe it's just not for me or something, like might have to do with. And I had a lot of pushback from people if I'm talking to younger people, or like I'm too old to talk to them or something like that, and so anyway, I gave up on that. I did put a little bit of energy into it, like I said, and kind of made some plans, and then I just kind of dropped it because I couldn't get any pickup on it, and
So I did attend some debate groups and debate classes, in high school, some AP classes and the forensic debate team,
oh really?
and
I
yeah,
never
in
did any of
college.
that.
When I was in college, I attended several debate team practices and meetups, and kind of volleyed, played devil's advocate with them, or just took one stance or another, and got really familiar with kind of on the spot argumentation. And what I loved the most is the ones that didn't kind of base themselves in one stance or another, but could otherwise have open intellectual discussions. Those are the ones that were my favorites because we could pose these ideas from different stances and understand that we're not, claiming that stance. We're just kind of projecting the intellectual concept of something and discussing it. And through those discussions, those are always like with you, actually, it's very much like that. Um, we're not loyal to in our discussions of policy. We're not loyal to a party. We're literally just two human beings who we're talking about like all this stuff in the world and life, and how
Sure, and it
things
moves
are.
around like the conversation instead of just having one topic. I find those to be a little bit boring sometimes, you know. It's like we're just talking about communism or something like that, and it just gets a little
Well, what's really
uh,
cool from a lot of the things that I was way more focused on uh, prior to Charlie Kirk dying was like because I was literally like almost anti-political, and I was thinking about that earlier today. How I was I just spent my time in the forest, and I was just kind of focused more on these other ideas that I had that had a lot more to do with educational programs and things that just ideas and methods essentially of bringing positive things and like the homesteading thing, which is how I came across you. Um, just these kind of philanthropic but somewhat profitable, lucrative ideas that I could pursue that would be worthwhile and just my path. Then when Charlie Kirk passed, it really brought to light that that is a huge hole in the balancing function of society and the direction of society that really needs to be
totally.
embraced is that's kind of respect, the willingness to talk, the talking to each other. And it's an example that we should all really live up to in terms of honoring and re-engaging in more active just discussion. And and that doesn't have to be political. That's why I love astrology and talking about astrology and you know general philosophies and kind of what ifs are always fun to explore, like the question of volcanic activity as a result of these earthquakes that continue to happen, off of Russia.
Sure. Or how about the solar connection?
The solar connection. What do you mean solar connection?
Well, that guy that I sent you a link to about the three eye atlas thing. Did you check that out? I think you'd like him.
The
His name's
guy.
Stefan Burns, and he calls himself a geophysicist. But his first videos, he's only been on YouTube like 3 years. His first videos are all like astrology based. He's like an astrologer too, and but he's kind of an astrophysicist too, and he ties in actual solar uh, observations with um, astrological alignments, conjunctions, and superior conjunctions, and he really gets pretty into that. He's young though. He's and I don't know why. I kind of like watching him, but anyway, he totally predicted the earthquake, the recent one that happened in Kamchatka, because of some astrological alignments and solar
Interesting.
activity. And so he'll draw these connections between um, like a coronal hole. So for instance, when we've had this one coronal hole that's on its, I think it's on its 18th cycle, where it keeps every time it comes around the coronal hole. What was that?
I didn't say anything.
My phone just made some weird noise. Anyway, the every time the coronal hole comes around, if it's the bigger it is, it has a type of plasma, um, uh, uh, not a burst, but a direct connection of solar wind and plasma that rides along the solar wind that comes directly out of the coronal hole. And you can, because it's gotten so big, and you can observe this through the solar satellites that they have that do all this. So you can find all that on like USGS or wherever it is. Anyway, it's like real time, 24/7 updated, and they have these different spectrography views that show different aspects of the sun, and then you can watch if it has like a solar flare. And when the solar flare happens, there'll be like a massive solar wind that hits the earth. And each time we've gotten some big ones, like we're having a solar maximum this year. And so because of the connection with that, he's been able to draw these predictions on earthquakes. And then he's actually, it's been very successful. I've been following it, and I'm really, really intrigued about it. And then he's actually talks about a lot of stuff like what you talk about with the more planetary alignments and stuff. And he'll pull up a view of the planets in 3D space, and he sits in front of a green screen and pulls the planets up all behind him, and he's moving it on the screen. And he was like, "Oh, okay, look we've got this thing with Uranus right now, and it's conjunct with Jupiter, and oh, look at this alignment. Well, these things are almost in perfect alignment." And when that happens, don't be surprised if we get some earthquake or volcanic activity uptick during this, and he'll be real loose about it. He'll be like, I'm not saying it's gonna happen, but there's a really good likelihood. And then, uh, like, so right before that Kamchatka earthquake happened, there was some type of solar alignment, whatever. You could find the day right before that earthquake happened. He literally put out a video the day before, like, don't be surprised if a huge earthquake hits. And then
Wow.
boom, and he says boom shakalaka, and he's pretty good for a young kid, and I think
Cool.
you'd like it. I think you'd like
Yeah,
it.
if I could
Relates to what you're
avoid
talking about.
if I could avoid being around an earthquake, that'd be something for sure.
I mean,
Wow. I
it
don't
could
think.
happen anywhere on the world, though. He's really looking at the whole world, and
Yeah, the thing is, I mean, I don't think I've ever looked. Nope, I've never looked in terms of a natural disaster at astrology in terms of alignments and how and causations or anything. That is an interesting concept of the world itself. Um,
yeah, there's a direct connection between solar wind hitting us and Earth types events. So, like, also right now, our magnetic field is greatly weakened because uh, the magnetic poles are shifting. Do you know that? So, like, the magnetic poles have shifted something like 21% or something, 21
yeah,
degrees.
since the 70s. Yeah,
And
since
well, it's been on this kind of
1978.
slow move. That's it's
Yeah,
gone over itself and kind of backtrack over itself, and now it's increased in in speed. So it's kind of bizarre. And anyway, because of that, that's one of the reasons that's related to. Right now, we have a very weakened magnetic field. So when uh, if you look at it on there's different graphs that kind of show how the magnetosphere protects the Earth from solar wind. And when a solar flare happens right now, with our weakened magnetic field, there's all sorts of different things that can happen on the Earth, but one of the biggest ones is blackouts. So, like that blackout that happened in Spain and Portugal, that happened directly connected to a solar wind event. Like there was solar flare,
well,
and then boom, and nobody, like almost nobody in the media talks about it. It's like, but it's very an obvious connection. So anybody who's actually a solar observer, there's a guy I watched called Solar Observers, and I kind of wonder when I watch these guys. The back of my mind, I kind of feel like, I mean, I don't know, I don't know what to believe because I think there's so much
there's
manipulation and control. I don't even know if I mean, I don't know.
there, there's always kind of this it's interesting looming thought that a star can explode and that's nearby without us knowing about it. And the way we find out, it's just boom. It's hit us, and we are destroyed as a result of it. Essentially, just mass burst. of energy and radiation, etc., through the universe that just completely overtakes our solar system. Um, Something that some large scale event could just instantly come through at any time and just happen without any warning at all. So, the it's possible,
Well, I don't even. I
and
guess what I mean when I say I don't know is I don't even know if I believe what mainstream science says. I don't know, man. There's just
I
there's a
haven't been
lot of
to space.
questions. Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
know that
I haven't been
I
to
for
space.
sure kind of don't think we went to the moon. And I don't know really what that means, but just space
Well,
exists,
there's a
or is it
huge.
something more like what's described in um, in the Book of Enoch? And in that video that I sent you today, that's a guy that I really respect a lot. His name's John Levi, and he does these videos mainly on the. He's only started like 7 years ago, but he's probably one of the ones I respect most, talking on the Tartaria concept. And he goes real deep uh, into all sorts of aspects of awareness and knowledge. And he talked just today. That was a video. He makes a video every week. He did a little review of the Book of Enoch, or I think he asked ChatGPT. Actually, he calls it the robot, and sometimes he'll use that as a funny reference. But it's always like uh, most of the time it's more for like looking at how there's some kind of control system trying to tell us that this is the way to think or that this is what something is. But anyway, he references the Book of Enoch to ask it about what the strangest things in Enoch are, and and ChatGPT lists it out, and it has to do with well, uh, one of the things is that he describes um, these controlling systems inside the upper, like because the angels give him a ride through the depths of the world and then up into the heavens, and he describes a machine that controls the stars and the sun and the moon and the heavens and the different layers. And anyway, I think all that stuff's very interesting to me because it just brings me back to the concept of I don't know, and all I really know is me and my own magnetosphere, and my body, and that's the only thing I can actually know. I can know my own experience, and I do observe a lot of like things
Well,
that are in
the
alignment with flat Earth. Even I can't disprove that. I don't know what's going on.
well, there's been a lot of things, kind of like the sun, the Earth making a full rotation while the sun was in view.
You mean that thing that
Mm.
tried to disprove the flat Earth? The
Well, yeah, it did. It did because if the Earth was flat, that literally would not have been possible.
well, that's based on I don't know. I find that to be highly controllable. Whatever the end result, the whole thing, it's like a flat Earth debunking thing. You see this online everywhere, and I'm just saying I don't know. I definitely didn't find it to be uh, based on my own understanding of the way that things are manipulated and stuff that you couldn't control a scenario to make that happen. And
Well, no, but I mean, just the fact that before flat Earth became a modern popular thing to argue, really, or kind of a bigger thing than it was ever before, people got into an airplane, flew across the Atlantic, just continued flying east and ended up right back where they started. I mean, if the Earth was flat, you would literally not be able to do that, but people have done that and provided
that's a very
plenty.
definitive way of thinking about something that's so much grander than our actual knowledge of it. So uh, there's definitely methods or observations that could lead to. Anyway, the point of what I was saying, if you look at what Enoch talks about in some of these apocryphal books, they actually offer more questions than and are in alignment with these other principles. And so
I mean,
it's
the
just
idea of a constructed type of space environment and it being the way it's demonstrated to us on Earth, I could totally see that.
or
But
I
like
mean,
things
what
like
about the possibility of it's just an even bigger system, and there's the concept of other lands. There's one of the things that
well, I
John
mean,
Levi goes
we have
over is in a couple of his
we
episodes
have
is to talk
satellites
about
and
the talk about
we have
Google Earth
satellites in
and how there's
orbit.
these things inside Google Earth. So if you I could show you, they'll blow your mind because you can see there's some edits inside Google Earth where that kind of imply that something's being hidden from us. And if you look at some of these old maps, have you ever heard of
There's tons
Rupus
of
Negra?
shit that's yeah, there's tons of shit that's hidden and altered through satellite imagery, but
Totally, and whether or
it's
not like the whole ice wall thing, or whether so
I
Antarctica. If
mean,
you go to the center of Antarctica, there's actually a point, and you can find this on Google Earth, where it's all these images that have all been spliced together, and there's a point. It's like a star. It's where they all come together and you can find that specifically. You go right to the center of Antarctica on Google Earth, and you can see that that is not a singular. There's no image of Antarctica that when you get to that center point, it's not one image. It's a compilation of all these images, like thousands of them, that all come
well, I
together
mean,
as like a star into the center. Almost like you've
eh,
taken the edges of something and pulled it all in if it was a flat thing. And anyways, it's just interesting. And then also when you look at these ancient, really old maps, there's this place at the North Pole called Rupus Negra, and there's this four land masses that's on these old maps. And what's really interesting about it is how well done these maps are. So it's like,
so I wouldn't be surprised if even the satellites themselves are part of the image manipulation is to remove certain things, which is pretty common, and it could include entire land masses. In fact, it's historically has included land masses, and only when kind of it
that's what I'm
really,
saying. You could hide stuff from Google Earth if
yeah,
you
oh
had.
yeah, no, I
So
think that's because Antarctica is a huge
there's something about it. There's something going
proof,
on with that.
yeah, a huge proof of that with the amount of hush hush huge
Yeah,
investments and activities going on down there.
right. And also the fact
Uh,
that there's a global agreement that all countries follow to not go past the 60th parallel. Yeah,
yeah, so
and
there's
so there's some kind of weird thing about that, and then it's just of course you could easily concoct a debunking thing to kind of shut people up on this stuff, but when you get into the older maps, there's a it's as if they had a knowledge of this stuff, right? And one of the other things that I found the
Antarctica was
most.
there and relatively close to its actual shape and
Antarctica existed on
size.
these some of these maps before it was discovered
Yeah,
in our modern
well,
times. So how the
yeah,
fuck does that
exactly.
make any sense? So whoever was this one of these ancient societies, they were excellent navigators, and they had places. Some of these maps show these cities, like for instance in North America, at all the different places where they exist now, supposedly before the colonizers ever came, and it shows castles on them and all these different things that signify the cities of the locations and certain towns. And actually, the name America predated Columbus and stuff like that. And there's evidence of that. And but also like the town name. So like Chicago is called Shalaga, and uh, San Francisco was stems back to super early stuff. And anyway, the Washington D.C. is called Nuremberg, and it's really interesting when there's just something to be drawn if you some type of extrapolation if you take into context all of these different sources, and uh, and everybody believed the Earth was flat before then as well. And there's something about the if you were to, because of the way a compass works, You ever thought of just, getting back into words again? I always thought this was really interesting. I hadn't heard this until just this year, but come pass. Like a compass says inside it the word come pass, as if it's drawing you to the north. The north, as it's defined in these old maps, has to do with the magnetic North Pole, which is this rock called Rupus Negra, the black rock. Okay, that's what that means in Spanish. Uh, anyway, isn't it interesting that the biggest companies on our planet right now are called BlackRock and Blackstone? I'm not sure. Just this is just part of the weird thing of I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, there could be something there. Definitely.
I don't know. Yeah, I think that I think there
Um,
is. I like the fact that all the ancient societies also were really into astrology, right? Like it seems like there's knowledge of it, and whether it's the Mayans and the Mayan calendar and their knowledge of these cycles of the sky, it seems like it's like we're told that there are these primitive people walking around in you know
so I
pieces of
uh I
skin on
actually
their just covering their nads and stuff, and they're just like some super primitive people that are killing each other over nothing. But I don't know if there isn't something more to this. Like there's ancient knowledge and stuff
so
that's been
yeah,
hidden from us.
before I ever got into astrology, I had noticed with the Facebook memories would pop up, and I'd noticed, usually in the evening would be kind of when I'd get around looking at Facebook and winding down, and so I'd noticed this pattern of the posts that would come up from the years before having a kind of themed experience in terms of a good day or a bad day or even topics or memories that I would gravitate towards or certain events. Certain patterns really emerged in reflection and being able to say, wow, like there's certain times of the year where things are like this, or I go through this kind of thing, and the relation to the sun has a lot to do with it in terms of astrology. And so it was interesting to later see it kind of confirmed as I got into astrology and recognized, like, oh, the sun pattern, that's why I was noticing these patterns, because the effects of the sun can are fairly predictable in terms of the kinds of ways that things present themselves. And recognizing that, I was able to actually kind of pick up on those kinds of reactions and navigate, make different choices a little better, and
Well, I
definitely
think
made a
there's
difference.
definitely something there for sure. That's why I like watching these guys. I pay attention, so I'll pull up every once in a while. I did a thing where I was connecting it to, how in Nazi Germany, one of the symbols is, well, basically the swastika actually is a symbol that goes, it's super old, and there's another one that's related to it, and it's called the
Yeah,
Black Sun. Have you ever heard of that?
didn't it originally like symbolize peace and unity or
It's a
strength or
total
something like
peace
that?
symbol. It's something way deeper. But did you know? I mean, like the stuff that happens in the movie The Raiders of the Lost Ark, that's based on a lot of facts. So it turns out that there's a whole component of Hitler's period of time. He had a huge interest in ancient artifacts, and they were going around the world looking for the Ark of the Covenant. And
Yeah,
but
they
not
were.
so like it's that's like that stuff is based on facts and reality, and there's this
Oh,
connection between the black sun. So I did a video on it. It did pretty good on TikTok. It was pretty interesting, but I almost got banned off of TikTok for posting this because it's just talking about the black sun is like a taboo thing I'm not supposed to talk about. I realized this is one of the points where I started realizing there's these algorithms, there's certain things that you're not allowed to talk about. And I think that's when we start getting closer to the real truth on some things, at least the truths that are trying to be hidden. And so anyway, the I was relating it to the coronal hole because it was getting bigger. It was earlier this year. And so this coronal hole thing, that was when I found Stefan Burns too, that guy I shared with you, because he started doing videos years ago, but I had only found him when I was doing this research on this coronal hole growing. And I thought to myself, oh, that it's only because of this particular view we have of the sun, where we can look at it. It's like I think it's the 5 angstrom view. Anyway, it shows the when we have coronal holes, and coronal holes are an area on the surface of the sun that has no magnetic energy, so it's a magnetic hole. And when that happens, that's what it does is it creates this bizarre high-speed solar wind from the sun. But that was growing, and I did this whole video where I just hypothesized that what if that grew to cover the whole sun, so the sun becomes non-magnetic, basically would be what that meant. And then through this one view, it would look black essentially because the way it looks is like a black spot.
Right.
Anyway, so I was like, is that the black sun? And I'm kind of doing this whole video. Totally like almost got me banned from TikTok. Had to pull that down. But I had a whole bunch of
That's weird.
feedback on it before that. And everybody's like, whoa, different things, bringing up different aspects of it. And I just find it to be a very interesting concept because I think that also much of history is a lie. I think that we've been taught, we live in this particular era of the now where when you control history, that's a way of controlling consciousness. And you can, I don't, I, that's partly why I made that weird video about, I don't really know what happened with Hitler, and all that stuff. I know that in some weird ways, uh, I mean, that we've been
My
sold a
daughter,
story about it.
my daughter got fairly upset about something about Hitler and was very passionate. And I said, I think in terms of the things that happened, it's got to be understood that Hitler was not solely responsible for what happened, and there was actually a very maniacal and very strong group of individuals that influenced him, backed him, and maybe in some
Yes,
cases even forced him to do
I
things.
think that's possible too. I very much think that's a possibility. Candace Owens talked about it in one of her videos, uh,
Well,
talking
and we
about
talked
the
about
Bolshevik
how it,
Revolution as well and how they killed more Christians during that than actually died in Hitler Germany.
yeah, and I think it's interesting because in terms of fascism, the interesting thing about that symbol that we were talking about was that bundle of sticks bound around the axe confines the axe and binds the axe to the bundle of sticks. So one can't really move without the other moving. And and that symbol itself, the irony of it is it's an item or a tool or a weapon that gets wielded. And so somebody else ultimately has authority over it altogether. Not in itself. The axe has no willpower, so to speak. So it's a wielded item, and it's at the mercy and control of whoever holds it.
Right.
And
But I mean, that was
I
where my
think that's
perception came from on the weird. It's almost like it makes it unusable, though. Like so is that symbolic of something else, like a community protecting the destructiveness of? So if you think
oh
of the
no
axe
no
as a symbol for war or for something like that, then it's the need for the community to protect it. I don't know. That's where I drew that from with that concept.
so well I looked into it even a bit further, and it was actually an item, a real item
that was actually used, very similar to a baton.
Well, that
Only,
all that's a theory, though. I'm telling you, I've done a crap load of research on it too. Really, there's no actual. There's some people that have used it symbolically and created different things, but because it's an ancient symbol, much like the black sun. So this is just one of the weird things why I think that there's more than meets the eye about this part of the story. I think we've been sold that these are the most evil people in the world, and that's the story that we've been told, and that's the way it's going to be. And that's just all there is to it in this timeline. But I think there's more than meets the eye. Uh, I think
I
that
think there was
Hitler.
definitely
I
a
think
lot of under the surface activities going on for
yeah.
all countries during
Undersea activity. There's this need to find these relics. These ancient. I think they're technology actually, or something like that. And that, but in part of the goal of the Tartarian research is to kind of uncover the fact that there's a direct correlation between people finding these items in the United States and the creation of the United States. And some people speculate, and I think you'll find this interesting, that actually the Constitution comes from this previous civilization, that our Constitution and this concept of this uh, like the reason why it's so good is because the origin might come from this whatever thing that's called Tartaria, but we don't know the name of it, the previous civilization that needed to be erased. And that it had these different symbols embedded within it. And one of them was the fasces. And but it does go back to Roman times and before even. And once you start drawing the conclusions that if you watch some of the videos from John Levi, for instance, and he's got hundreds, but um, there's a certain point where you hit an almost inevitability of this truth being that is true. There's too much evidence that points to it. And you kind of have to follow it and go down this rabbit hole yourself to come to that understanding like I have. But I've seen just too much evidence, and there's too much of a control mechanism to hide it. It ends up making so much sense, and so that's partly where some of this weird thing that I have. I don't know that what could cause that civilization to be destroyed, but I do see that there's a direct connection between technology that comes during our industrial revolution and also the different wars, right? So the wars that we think of as these kind of big giant wars, whether it's the Civil War and everything leading into the 20th century wars, all seem to stem from this technological innovation explosion that happens right around the 1800s. And and during this primary formation time of the United States, it seems to be like the technology was discovered here. And if and all the and you can start to draw a connection that whether it's uh, these different types of things like the Crusades not being about uh, pushing Christianity, like that's the cover story, but actually being about going to these ancient sites and digging them out or finding places that weren't buried in mud or and finding these technologies, re-engineering them, reverse engineering them essentially, and figuring out how they were usable, and then becoming the power of the world power at that time. And it just so happens that who became the world power after the Industrial Revolution? We did. And if once you connect these Tartarian examples, and it sounds pretty crazy, but we at first, right? And most people you'll find it. So like if somebody talks about it on Joe Rogan or something, you'll just be all, oh, this is a bunch of bullshit. But if you really do the research on it, uh, it really does line up. And uh, anyway, it's just there's something to that, and I think that there's an almost kind of benevolence or something in this other society that existed beforehand. And the technology that they had is largely unknown to us, I believe. But almost everything that we have now, whether it's electricity or um, trains, trains are definitely so one of the things that is really good evidence of this actually is all the train tracks that were dug up. So, and if you talk to any of some of the people who had written down different records, or a lot of the train tracks, and they'll have pictures of them you can kind of uncover in archives. And it's just them digging the train tracks out of the dirt because everything was buried under this mud. And places like Buffalo, New York, which is where that uh, New York itself, Washington, D.C., the reason why they have these magical alignments is because these people were really into solar alignments, into star and solar alignments, and they had a kind of sacred geometry underlying their designs. And that's why all the buildings all look the same. They all have this similar, and they're palaces. And I think that maybe there's a connection with the previous people being more about having those buildings be for the people, whereas we use them for the power. So when we took over, whoever this, you know, it's like we're subjects under this rule of the people who took over, if you believe this. And it's like I say, I don't know, I'm just presenting a bizarre theory, but that that a lot of it lines up, that it has a possibility, and it lines up with um, the Spanish and the Portuguese when they were colonizing, going to the Middle Americas to go find stuff down there, right, and bring back all this gold. And gold, for instance, is you know how they melted it too? Like there's all, like the Spanish, they would melt all the gold. They have none of it left. They melted it all down. Well, it's really interesting as a scientist myself to discover that gold is one of the most fundamental elements from an electrical standpoint. It's actually the most conductive, next to copper. Has a specific electrical usage, and that's why it's used in all these computers nowadays. And so you can actually do gold recovery just by recovering parts from computers, right? You get very, very little. They use a very, very tiny amount, but it's a necessary element to make computer chips and certain computer
Yeah, it's the
components.
same with cell phones.
Totally. So there's gold has a way futuristic purpose that was never understood back then, right? And I always thought I had my own weird theories as I was reading that stuff when I was young. I used to think, maybe gold, they would have these medallions to protect their hearts or something. It's, protecting us from energy or, bad energy from people or something like that. But I think I'm one of those people. I'm open-minded. I really could see a connection between Freemasons and secret societies and uh, uh, the Knights Templar, right? And the burning of the Library of Alexandria, the burning of all the cities. If you look up the Great Fire and just plug in any city after that, of all the main cities in the United States, every city went through a major Great Fire. And if you go look at the pictures of things like the Chicago Great Fire, it looks more like a nuclear explosion. So I'm serious, and they all do actually.
I
If you
haven't
find
I haven't reviewed older footage of those kinds, but I do recall remembering because it was interesting to me about the fire brigades that they had, and
for the Chicago Fire,
the the stories I read, yeah, not just
oh,
Chicago,
for
but
all of them, yeah, the fire brigades,
yeah,
sure.
yes. So there was this interesting idea involved in the fire departments or fire brigades. The communities getting together and they would practice actually, and it was this huge competition type thing and all that. It was
The fireman's muster.
yeah, and because my angle, what my interest was, I was just generally interested in the fact that many, if not all, of the major cities in the United States have at one point or another had more than 50% of it burned completely at one point in time, or multiple times, and there was really bad years, and most of the content. There's a couple. There was like a documentary or something on YouTube or something like that. It was pretty long, and it talked about how industrialization and poor planning. And then there was kind of like this reference about how they really couldn't have done it any other way. It was like almost as if a reference to like, well, it's we found it like this.
They're actually
Yeah,
called they literally are. That's where we get the word founded from. If you look up the meaning of founded, it means found. So
yeah, that
and
makes sense.
so all these buildings that were founded, and if you just extrapolate that, like all those maps I was talking about that have these cities on them, imagine if you were, pre-colonization days, if you were in possession of a map with these different locations marked on it, and there was already, you knew that, Queen whoever over in Spain was already sending fleets out to go and pulling back gold or whatever and melting it back down. And you knew that, you had one of those maps and your map showed North America, for instance, or maybe it showed Brazil, and if you look at the Argentina, Buenos Aires, it's an insane city, right? Huge, huge city. All these same buildings, they all follow the same exact look. If you look at for instance, also the weird thing of the connection to fire is these are all stone buildings. The buildings are stone. Stone don't burn, So like when you see the pictures of the Chicago fire and the aftermath, it's weird because if you look at, just look up, for instance, the evolution of the Chicago City Hall. So there's one period, I think it's the sixth one, they say. I don't believe any of this because I don't. I believe each one of these buildings was a found building. They just moved the location to one of these buildings that they had uh, dug out better or whatever, something like that. Shalaga was one of the most clearly notated repeated cities on these maps that show North America, and most likely, uh, I mean, it's easy to extrapolate that there's this one building, for instance, I think it's the sixth one, the sixth city hall. It's so magnificent. I'll send you a picture actually. When you see that, it just doesn't line up, man. It's a freaking mega palace. And it's like, why would they build that? What? And it's so amazing.
And it's
And
an
also,
actual photograph. It's not like
oh
a
yeah, yeah,
sketch
there's
or
many of
something.
them, many of them. So there's this one building though, when you see it, you're just like, holy fuck. And then it
Chicago,
becomes this
right?
kind of extrapolation of
Chicago.
yeah, look up the Chicago's. Are you at a computer?
Yeah, I'm just looking it up on my
Okay.
phone.
So you'll see there's black and white photos, and it's this one, it'll have these kind of like square types of large, giant stone pieces at the bottom, and then it goes into more of a pillar structure up above, and it's like a super mega complex building. I don't know. I'm not sitting in front of my computer, so I'm anyway. I can show you a picture of it, share it with you. But
Well, I mean, when I look
what I
up
think
Chicago
is
fires, let's see, there's one picture. Let's see, that's an actual picture.
there's many photos you can find from it, but a lot of people have done much deeper dives into this. So I don't, I'm not going to be able to explain it to you, but you could look up some of their stuff. That's the only reason I don't do this myself yet, about those locations, because a lot of people have already kind of deep dove into them, and it's very convincing. But I think when you start to look at places like, for instance, here, so I live in this town called Atascadero. Part of the whole concept of the Tartarian theory is that a lot of these places were buried in some type of mud flood. Well, this town, Atascadero, in Native American means um, mud pit, right? And it just so happens we have one of these buildings. The City Hall of Atascadero is actually in this place called the Sunken Gardens. So, and when I went and I did a whole video on it. It's amazing. It follows all the same. It's exactly the same thing. It's got a big dome. It's a big columns, giant doors that don't make any sense. If you're people of coming to a place in the early 1900s, I mean, all this stuff has just happened in 100 years, man. It's so bizarre.
Yeah,
So like,
there's that's even on because the Tartarian Empire, as it's kind of generally referred to, I guess. Uh, Joe Rogan did kind of a show, or maybe it's a guy that looks like Joe Rogan. It kind of sounds similar, but it's not the same guy. Either way, they did a show on it, and it was pretty interesting because the architectural techniques didn't exist. The methods of plastering things like that and molding things, it didn't exist.
yeah. I mean, there's so many layers to it, and you'll find it. It exists in every sense. You could do your own. I bet you there's some in Maricopa, dude. Of like check out the City Hall next time you're, and just think of that and check it out. One of the key characteristics is buried windows. So windows that go into the ground. They'll always have like a subsection of the building that kind of seems to explain it, with some kind of like ramp going down, or oftentimes they'll just be like
So
cutouts around the windows. But literally, you don't
yeah,
build windows into the ground. That's
well,
you know what I
we're
mean? Or
we're pretty
doors.
we're pretty like well established in the mountains, and if anything was buried, it's probably just buried more now than rather than being excavated or found. But the foundations of Mariposa itself was huge stone walls that were put into place by the Chinese immigrants. But even I don't know. There's just some of them that kind of have an older feel than even that. So it's
So
interesting.
I always had this weird thing, because for us, living here, I grew up in Memorial Bay, and in San Simeon, we've got the Hearst Castle, and it's got this bizarre story behind it. And of course, I never really thought about that. I was just assumed, okay, this is just the story, it's connection of Hearst. Once you plug in, I mean, Hearst has this really bizarre history, right? Like his family and they've made multiple movies and series about that relate to him, and he was like a gold. He would hunt for gold in different parts across the western United States, and that's how he got all his money. And it kind of brings back this weird connection that I think inside these buildings was gold. That was the goal. The whole gold rush was finding gold in these buildings. That's why San Francisco was already on these maps. It's even called San Francisco. There's a lot of pictures that show San Francisco completely built out only 30 years after it was colonized or whatever, or populated. And none of the population stuff makes sense. In that video that I sent you today, that's just one of John Levi's videos, but he goes through kind of places one by one. One of the most interesting ones, he's in Utah, so one of the most interesting ones is the Mormon temple. Dude, it's just, it fully lines up. Like all this stuff, they excavated it, the front of it, and people got these pictures that show that it goes way deeper with the same kind of windows into the ground problem, doors underground, all the stuff that's been buried. And what it would line up to with me and kind of like putting together the story of Hearst Castle is that there was these factions of Freemasons that were sent like families, they would be sent during the early, so people like Lewis and Clark are probably just one of the groups, that gets sent out, like, and each one's designed to go and bring a whole family with them and take over colonize these cities that already existed, whether it's Chicago and they didn't really know what they were because they hadn't been there yet. And it was a bit of an exploration. So people got what they got, and the family was sent, okay, we know that it's around here. You got to go to that location. It's somewhere around here. Hunt for it until you find it. Ask the natives, get help, and then you take it over, dig it out. And part of the reason that we know of them as the Freemasons, this is just me speculating, I'm extrapolating here, but is because what they would do is they would remove the bricks from the buildings. Almost all these brick buildings were built out of bricks, and so they would remove bricks and stones and also trophies. So like the thing that we think of as a trophy, right, is this bizarre thing that shape, that weird urn shape. And that shape is all over these buildings, all over them. And so one of the trophies that you would get from the building as you disassembled it so that you could put other parts of the building in whatever city you're colonizing, because these buildings they were perfectly constructed, and some of them they just can't explain. So the way that you deal with the explanation is to disassemble the building, reassemble it in new designs and formats in other places. And so Hearst Castle is either a found location. I believe it's not, though. It's the pieces of other buildings likely reassembled at that location over on the coast. And then he was just one of these guys that found a whole bunch of them and was, these are the power games that were played with the Freemasons and the different factions of groups, some of them trying to take power and wield power through money, and the whole gold thing was finding these locations, and the more of them you could find, the more power you had, the more you could buy people and kill people and maintain your power. And the whole story of Hearst goes through this, like in the, what's that show, Deadwood? I think they go through it a little bit. He comes into that town, Deadwood, in that show on HBO that was like from about 10 years ago or whatever.
Oh
And
yeah, okay. Well, like I said, those kinds of things, if anything, they're still buried around here. Not so much. I mean, Yosemite itself. I'm sure you've been, right?
oh yeah, yeah, I went
So
2 years ago.
it, it's pretty well traveled in its public areas. It's backcountry, not so much. And so there's literally so much unexplored land in California. It's kind of amazing. And so the potential of finding new finds is still pretty high because a lot of people stick to the trail when they go places for long, super long backcountry hikes, and other than that, it's just protected lands. And what's interesting about it being protected was national forest preservation, ironically, was put into place when even places like, Merced, and there's just all these small towns. Like there was such a vast amount of open land available when they put these protections of these lands into place that especially for a president to come out and make a big show of protecting this, like our national parks in particular. It's interesting that almost all of them are surrounded by protected national forests. or wildlands that are protected, that are federally owned, and a large portion of them is unused, completely unused, and a large portion of that is unexplored or underexplored. So the potential of things like that just kind of
Have you
sitting out there and
have
being
you ever
out
heard of
there
the
is
Black
very.
Hawk helicopter zone of the Grand Canyon? So there's like
Oh
part of the
yeah,
Grand Canyon where if you just show up at, and there's this weird story from the early 1900s where um, one of some other explorer guy or adventurer guy was going down the
that's
Colorado River and he finds uh, a underground temple or temple inside the mountain, and then he brings back some artifacts from it and contacts whoever, Smithsonian or whoever he contacts, and then afterwards and he actually talks to some before that. He talks to some newspaper, so it gets printed in a newspaper. Man discovers Egyptian artifacts and Buddha-like things in this temple, and it says he discovered a whole underground city. And and then after that, after this article gets released, then it comes out. Oh no, he was wrong. It's fake. There's nothing. There's nothing there. But if you go by there to this day, and this has been tested. Joe Rogan talks about it on his stuff every once in a while.
yeah.
This
I
is one
saw
of
the
those. So
Charlie
if
Kirk
you just
stuff.
show up there, the Black Hawk helicopters show up, and all of a sudden, so they're literally protecting it to this day. Makes no sense. Like that's not the kind of spot you'd put a military base and protect it. There and whatever. I just all the stuff I find very interesting. It goes back to the I don't know. Goes back
Yeah, it
to
does, and that's exactly why, earlier I kind of went on that rant about government transparency and the whole Big Brother idea, as long as it's really just universally owned, where everybody can have access to that public system or whatever. So it's just kind of like if I could task AI with something, it'd be sorting through that data as long as AI is not sentient, not not manipulative or whatever. And we could actually even test AI in that kind of way. But
well, it's yeah. So that's what. Yeah, this is. I'm about to do a video. I thought about it today. I'm gonna do a whole video on are people trying to make God with AI, and I do think that that's what's happening. I think there's a lot of evidence towards it, and I think it's a slippery slope. And then just that video with Sam Altman, I think, is very revealing. It shows something sinister in the underbelly and the connection. Well, boy, when Tucker Carlson hits that point where he's like saying that that guy's got murdered, and boy, Sam Altman gets defensive and he's like, that sounds accusatory. And did you see that part?
no, I don't
Oh
think so.
god, dude, it's so freaking trippy because it just reveals that there is a power thing going on with this, and it's very apparent. He's like caught right there. Man, I mean, I'm pretty good at reading people. There's just something about that like exchange. It's very
With Tucker
interesting.
Tucker Carlson and who?
And Sam Altman, he's the owner, the CEO of OpenAI,
Oh, and that
ChatGPT.
video that you sent me. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't finish
So
watching it.
the
Actually,
about halfway
it's
through, it hits that point, and he confronts him. He literally says, "So that he got murdered," and Sam Altman's just like, "Holy shit!" And it's like he doesn't have a pre-prepared. Everything else, he's got these pre-prepared answers, and he sounds really smart, and it's some of it just sounds very normal. But when
yeah.
Tucker Carlson
I mean,
gets to that, and also when he talks about the moral code underlying it, that is so revealing. It's like I thought that was so well done the way that Tucker Carlson asked those questions because he basically was able to pull out in that very short amount of time, because that's only an hour, and inside that amount of time he was able to uncover the fact that and catch him basically with a gotcha on the fact that he has no moral code underlying. And he at one point Tucker Carlson's like, give me names, who's doing the moral part of this, give me their names. And Sam Altman says, "Oh, I don't want to dox my people or whatever. Ultimately, I'm responsible. You can use me." And then Tucker Carlson says, "Oh, okay, so this thing's like a god, though." And then Sam Altman's like, no,
I'll
no,
watch
it's
it.
not
I
a
actually,
god, it's not like."
I
And
I
he
actually have
goes,
to
"But
get
it's like
going
a
and do.
higher power." Okay,
No, like I've been trying to say for a few minutes. I actually have to get going. I've got a couple things I have to do tonight before I get to sleep, and I just saw what time it is. So,
cool.
um, yeah, but I do want to. I'll definitely put that on. I gotta take a shower and fucking clean some shit up and just get ready for tomorrow and stuff. So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I'll give that a watch and a deeper listen. So I'll be more up to date on the whole interview. But it sounds super worth talking about more. So, but yeah, man, I just like kind of noticed what time it was, and I've got a bunch of shit I gotta do. Unfortunately, I've been putting it off.
No, it's a good time.
So
Good time to stop. All right, bro. Have a good night.
yeah, good talking, man, and we'll talk soon.
All right, late.
Later.